Chapter 1442. Come, 1, 2, 3, let's celebrate your recovery, cheers. In the dormitory of the sleeping spell, a small celebration was underway. Looking at Dusk's heartfelt smile, Balshan helplessly raised her wineglass. As a working partner, Dusk would visit her whenever she was free, completely disregarding her current condition. If it was in the past on Sleeping Island, she would never be so concerned about a non-combat witch. This feeling of guilt and gratitude made her feel as though she owed Dusk a lot. Even though Balshan knew that Dusk would never think of this. However, when her gaze shifted to the other person, her expression did not look so good. Why are you here as well? Charms confidently downed the wine in one gulp. I was the one who brought this grape wine. Why can't I be here? You make it sound as though we can't drink wine without you. Balshan rolled her eyes. There are so many taverns in Neverwinter, can't we buy it anywhere? It's a pity that His Majesty has declared an emergency state of war in the western region. Wine is now a restricted product and without permission, you can't buy it even if you want to. Charms shrugged. That's why you should thank me, I secretly stole this from my father. War. Balshan suddenly lost the mood to bicker. Even though she was recuperating in bed these days, she could still feel the increasingly tense atmosphere in Neverwinter. First, there were more and more news about the development in the weekly newspapers, and now there were 2 to 3 issues a week. There were reports from the front lines, as well as emergency recruitment and search lists. From the contents of the newspaper, although the garrison troops were gradually stabilizing their footing and pushing the flames of war out of the development, the price they paid was not small. The few grassland farms and settlements that they had painstakingly built were destroyed, and the missing workers were undoubtedly doomed. The most direct evidence of this was the decrease in the amount of eggs and meat in every meal, with bread becoming the main food item. Of course, this was many times better than the other cities she had experienced when she was in exile. At the very least, it was not a problem for her to fill her stomach. Secondly, it was the scene on the streets. Every day, she would see a large number of recruits dressed in military uniforms passing through the central street, with residents and relatives on both sides sending them off. The nervousness and excitement on the soldiers' faces formed a stark contrast with the reluctance and worry of the people around them. In terms of numbers, the number of troops that were transferred to the fertile plains was not a small number. This scale was on a completely different level compared to the Knight Regiment and the Church's Judgment Army. This was war. For the survival and continuation of the race, tens of thousands of people threw themselves into the fight, and behind them stood 10 times, 100 times more people to provide support. Compared to this, the battles she had experienced as a combat which were indeed insignificant. She had chosen to go to the fertile plains with Dusk earlier because she did not want to be seen by too many familiar faces. Now that the pioneering land had been destroyed, she would return to being a useless person again. Hey, why aren't you talking? Charms was surprised that Balshan did not mock him. He scratched the back of his head and stole a glance at Dusk. Did I say something wrong? Xia doesn't know. Xia stuck out her tongue. But Xia knows that people who say the wrong thing have to drink 3 more cups. Are you drunk? No, this is only the 2nd cup. Dusk is fine. Knock, knock, knock. At this moment, someone knocked on the door and interrupted Balshan's thoughts. Coming. Dusk jumped and opened the door. Lady Camilla? Standing behind the door was Sleeping Island's chief butler, Camilla Derry. She scanned the room before walking towards the other 2. Looks like you've exceeded the visiting time. Balshan forced a smile. Madame Derry has a deep hatred for people who aren't punctual. It'll be difficult for you to sneak in next time. How can that be? I clearly kept track of the time. It hasn't even been half an hour. Charms muttered softly. Just as Balshan was about to say something, Camilla walked past Charms and stood in front of her. The Witch Union has just issued a new recruitment order for all the witches in Grey Castle. The chief butler went straight to the point. Currently, the number of people is around 50, with priority given to those with combat experience. I feel that you might be more suitable, so I'm here to ask. Balshan couldn't help but be taken aback. She took a long time to understand the meaning behind Camilla's words. centralized recruitment, with priority given to combat experience. Could this job be related to war? But if that's the case, why aren't there any requirements for the applicant's abilities? You guessed correctly. Camilla seemed to have seen through her doubts. The witches will be forming a special team to support the front lines and assist the main force in dealing with more difficult battles. I can't reveal too much about the details, but you should be aware that there will be risks on the battlefield. So it's entirely up to you whether you want to go or not. Of course, even though it has nothing to do with abilities, it doesn't mean that you will definitely be chosen. The final outcome still depends on, I'll go. Balshan immediately replied. There's nothing to hesitate about, isn't there? Or rather, she had been waiting for such a day for a long time. Then, follow me. Camilla turned her body. Hey, are you really going to the front lines? While passing by Charms, he sounded a little worried. What? I thought you would cheer loudly. Balshan curled her lips. That way, no one will disturb you when you go on a date with Dusk. But he opened his mouth as though he wanted to say something, but as he stared at Balshan's back, he didn't say anything in the end. A day later, Balshan arrived at the starting station of the Misty Forest by train. The person in charge was changed from Camilla to a woman she had never seen before. She called herself Isabella, and she was mainly responsible for the selection and guidance of the recruits. Even though it was her first time meeting her, for some reason, Balshan felt a sense of déjà vu. Another thing that surprised her was that there were more people who responded to the recruitment than she had expected, not only from the sleeping spell, but also from the Witch Union. In the short half an hour of travel, she got to know Vanilla, Amy, Hero, and the rest. Other than that, she also saw a few familiar figures in the crowd, such as Iffy and Nightfall, who were once part of the Bloodfang Association. It seemed like they were more interested in proving their worth on the battlefield. After getting off the train, the witches were led by Isabella into a building that looked like a factory. The moment they stepped into the building, everyone's attention was attracted by a metallic object that was placed in the middle of the empty space. It looked like a car, and the wheels beneath it were proof. But it was different from any other car in Neverwinter. Just one side of the car had 5 wheels, and they were all made of metal. The bottom part of the wheel was connected and wrapped with metal plates, making it look extremely unique. Balshan recognized it at a glance. It was similar to the machines used to dig mud and cultivate land. That's right, it was the kind of thing called a tractor. But compared to a tractor, the metal lump in front of her was much larger, especially the upper layer, which was almost completely surrounded by metal plates. There was a fortress-like turret at its head, and a short metal barrel protruding from the middle was obviously a cannon. One look and it was obvious that it was a weapon made for war. Chapter 1443. All of you should already know that our city is under attack. Isabella clapped her hands to gather everyone's attention. But the enemy isn't just the demonic beasts. Behind these mutated beasts is an enemy that isn't inferior to the demons. According to reliable intelligence, their attacks will only get fiercer and fiercer, and the scale will continue to expand until they completely crush us. Neverwinter and the First Army naturally won't allow them to invade the last territory of humanity. However, it's easy to deal with the visible enemies, but the invisible ones are the real danger. This isn't an exaggeration, but a factual description. At this point, she snapped her fingers, and a few soldiers lifted a large piece of sackcloth. Hiss! There was a gasp of surprise in the crowd. Balshan was no exception. She had been captivated by the large metal object the moment she entered the factory and didn't notice the large gray cloth. And what was hidden beneath the cloth was a strange monster. It was half-standing, nearly 2 meters tall, and its scythe-like claws hung in the air, as though it would pounce on them at any moment. But upon closer inspection, one would realize that its body was covered in wounds. One of the wounds was as wide as a thumb, extending from its chest to its abdomen. It was a miracle that it didn't fall apart. Balshan realized that this fellow was already dead. The monster in front of you is what I call an invisible enemy, Isabella said loudly. When it moves, its entire body will blend into the background, and it will look like it has disappeared. In order to kill it, The first army paid the price of more than 30 men, and this happened in broad daylight. If there were more of them, and if the battle were to occur at night, the consequences would be unimaginable. At present, we have named it as a blade beast. There have been 5 confirmed cases of blade beasts attacking the development, and almost every single one of them was accompanied by a large number of casualties. This is just a specimen that was dragged back by the soldiers after it was torn apart, and it was pieced together according to Summer's recollection. Without a doubt, it will be our main target in the future. Then what can we do? Amy raised her hand and asked. Good question. Isabella nodded. Although blade beasts aren't demons or hybrids, they have a certain similarity, and that is magic power. In the eyes of ordinary people, they may be difficult to track, but for witches, as long as they go through a certain amount of training, they can make it impossible for them to hide. And the only thing you need to learn to use is this. She took out 2 metal plates that shone with silver light. Magic stone sigil. After listening to the detailed explanation, Balshan finally understood the purpose of forming this special unit. Of the 2 sigils, one was called Shriek, and the other was called Resonance. The former was originally used to guard against demons, while the latter was used to excavate relics. However, after some modifications, they became the key against the blade beasts. The effective range of the sigil of screaming was about 2 to 3 kilometers, and it would sound an alarm as soon as a magical creature was detected. The witches who were alerted needed to determine if the sound came from the blade beasts. Once the target was confirmed, it would switch to the resonance sigil to lock onto the attacker. At this time, a guiding line would appear between the target and the sigil, marking the latter's outline. As long as he fired according to the line of fire, he would be able to effectively restrain the enemy's movements. Although the principle sounded very simple, the actual application was much more complicated. Firstly, the adjusted sigil of listening would also react to the hybrid species, and the witches could only rely on their own experience to distinguish the difference between the sounds. When encountering a large horde of demonic beasts, the alarm would definitely be filled with a large amount of noise, so it was difficult to be foolproof with a single monitoring point. Secondly, its perception would be weakened by all sorts of things, including but not limited to hillsides, rocks, trees, and so on. This was especially true for metals. A single metal plate could reduce its effective range to several hundred meters, so it had to be placed in the most spacious position. The guiding line of the sigil of resonance would not be obstructed by any obstacles, but its biggest problem was that only the witches could see this thin line formed by magic power. Apart from that, when the target was not within their visual range, they had no other way to confirm the target they had locked onto. In other words, if they mistakenly used the hybrid species as a guide, the sigil of resonance would not show any abnormalities. I can teach you how to control the sigil, but I can't teach you how to protect yourselves, Isabella said methodically. Therefore, His Majesty has arranged a suitable position for all of you, and that is the commander of the war chariot. This iron war chariot, known as a tank, is a new weapon developed by the Ministry of Industry. It has both offense and defense, and even if it is surrounded by the hybrid species, it will not be difficult to escape unscathed. The short-barreled field cannon installed on it can destroy all enemies. As the commander of the chariot, you do not have to personally operate this complicated machine, but only have to guide the driver and the gunner. Of course, when necessary, you can bypass the gunner's control and take the initiative to aim. His Majesty calls this system Annihilation Fire Control, and all of you are the core of this system. Commanding and driving this gigantic machine, Balshan couldn't help but feel eager when she imagined the scene of this thing crushing the demonic beasts. In the next few days, all of you will be training with the First Army's tankers to understand its basic capabilities. But most importantly, you will need to master the usage of the sigil and the way to distinguish the enemy, Isabella concluded. Time is of the essence, so I hope that all of you will do your best. Those who pass the selection will become a member of Grey Castle's 1st Armored Corps. Northern region of the Kingdom of Dawn. When they saw Roland emerge from Fran's body, everyone heaved a sigh of relief, especially the members of the General Staff, whose faces revealed a look of relief. Even though this plan was proposed by His Majesty, The specific details and implementation steps were jointly planned by the General Staff. If anything were to happen to His Majesty, they would not be able to escape the blame. The only exception was the Pearl of the Northern region. She was the only person in the General Staff who could communicate with Roland with a normal expression. "How did the meeting go?" "It went better than expected," Roland said frankly. He had already made his decision the day after his conversation with Valkyries, but considering that entering the dream world through the conventional method was extremely risky and full of uncertainty for both parties, he decided to use the most direct method to complete the meeting, which was to pull the other party into the dream world without informing them. As it turned out, the thick ground did not affect the beam of light at all, and when both parties were blindfolded, the eye demons would not be able to provide any warning. There were also a few God's punishment witches guarding him, so even if Haxord discovered his whereabouts, they would not be able to pose a threat to him. However, the same method could not be used too many times. They would probably realize that they were not far from the hillside when they returned, and if they were prepared beforehand, they would not be completely safe even if they were deep underground. If there are any new developments, the demons will probably use letters to contact us. Roland turned to Iron Axe and instructed, "Leave a team in this area and report to me immediately if they make any movements. Also, they are still enemies, especially the monstrous beasts. Once they cross the warning line, the team cannot hold back." "Understood." The commander nodded. "I reckon that I won't have any dealings with the senior lords for a long time," Roland thought. In the dream world, he could faintly tell that the relationship between Valkyries and the senior lord named Sarakas wasn't ordinary. In the beginning, he felt it was a pity that the demon who came to obtain his trust was not Haxord, but from the looks of it, the results were better than he had expected. After all, such matters required trust the most. But just 2 hours later, before Roland could return to the City of Glow from the northern region, he received 2 pieces of shocking news. The deity of gods had suddenly shown signs of movement. According to Lightning's report, it was slowly ascending vertically, and its bottom was more than 300 meters above the ground. This seemed to defy the General Staff's conjecture that the floating island's height and magic power consumption were closely related. The second was that Fishball's team had once again seen the figures of the senior lords on the hillside, but this time, there were 2. Chapter 1444. You entered the realm of mind from here? Haxord surveyed the hillside before his gaze landed on his feet. Silent Disaster nodded. "I don't think that male will come again." He quietly opened a distortion door the size of a finger and extended his hand into it. It was soil. Furthermore, once the deity of gods begins its descent, there is no way to reverse it. You are just wasting your time. If you don't wish to come, you can leave first. Sarakas remained unmoved. "If I leave, who will take you away?" Haxord rolled his eyes silently. "You have already made a move on Mask, aren't you saying all this just to anger me?" When the king flipped through the memories, he was certain that he would see the Sky Lord's figure everywhere. Disobeying the king's orders, not reporting what he knew, instigating, he could imagine all these crimes with his eyes closed. If the king really sent other senior lords to deal with him, with Silent Disaster, who had top-notch combat strength, by his side, he would at least be able to protect himself. 100 meters down, it was still soil. "It doesn't matter if I can leave. Besides, just because you can't do anything, doesn't mean that Valkyries can't. Tisk, why don't you think about who came up with the idea to find Valkyries? What if she can't?" Silent Disaster did not reply. After descending 500 meters, the side of the distortion door suddenly turned into an empty space. Haxord adjusted his direction slightly and his fingers quickly touched a sticky liquid. He had an idea. "Have you ever considered forcefully taking this male with you?" Silent Disaster's eyes flickered, but she quickly regained her composure. "I might be able to bring him away, but keeping him alive will be difficult. You and I both know how weak humans are. Without confirming Valkyries' location, I cannot take the risk." "Is that so?" Haxord declined to comment. Regardless, he could not allow Valkyries to remain here and be smashed into smithereens by the deity of gods. It was for the sake of the race, but also for himself. Someone is coming. Silent Disaster looked ahead. There's more than one. Hacksword immediately opened the distortion door. Soon, 3 males appeared on a slope in the woods. The soldier who was responsible for delivering the letter was among them. Although there were more of them than when they first met, they were still unable to pose a sufficient threat to Silent Disaster. His Majesty has agreed to your request to meet. The leader walked in front of them and went straight to the point. You can enter the realm of mind in 15 minutes. But His Majesty has a condition. To actually agree to Sarakas's request, it seems like not all human kings are cowards. What conditions? Hacksword asked. The 2 of you must split up and enter the realm of mind one after another. And those who are not magic slayers must wear this. The man opened the box and took out an iron bracelet. The bracelet was clearly inlaid with a god's stone of retaliation. Hacksword was instantly enraged. It narrowed its eyes and said in a dangerous tone, "What is the meaning of this? Do you think I'll tie my hands and let the humans do whatever they want?" Although the leader had fear on his face, he did not take a step back. Magic power is equivalent to a weapon. It is common practice to remove your weapon during an important meeting. This is not a form of imprisonment. His Majesty believes that you are here with important information, which is why he is taking the risk to return. And because of this, he does not wish for any accidents to happen. What if I don't agree? You can leave on your own and stay far away from the mountain during the meeting, the soldier insisted. That's it. We have no time to delay. Silent Disaster looked at Hacksword. You can wait within the limits of your ability, just like the first time. I don't understand why you must follow me here. This fellow, must I say it out loud to understand? Sky Lord was momentarily at a loss for words. If it wasn't for the obvious decline in his rationality after seeing the Nightmare Lord, he would not be at ease if he did not follow her. After hearing so much shocking news, it was undoubtedly necessary for him to personally see the Valkyries and eliminate the possibility that it was a trap set by the humans. Whose side is this fellow on? But before Hacksword could discuss further, Sarakas had already walked to the side and closed her eyes, entering a meditative state. Looking at the deity of gods that was still rising, he could only suppress his dissatisfaction and buckle his wristband. The object did not look difficult to dismantle with brute force, and the humans probably did not have any hopes of using the god's stone to capture him. They were only stalling for time to prevent him from suddenly bringing Silent Disaster underground. And the 2 males behind the soldier, even though they did not carry any weapons, they made Hacksword feel that they were not easy to deal with. After waiting for a moment, Sarakas's breathing suddenly calmed down. They're here. Hacksword pretended to casually raise his hand and placed the 5-colored magic stone that was disguised as a ring in front of his eyes. In that instant, a pillar of light as wide as a city wall appeared before his eyes. The pillar of light was so large that he had no choice but to turn his head left and right to see the boundaries of the pillar. In that instant, he even thought that he had returned to the island in the bottomless land. This is... The consciousness domain that Silent Disaster mentioned was as vast as a city? He was beginning to believe in the human's words. With such astonishing abilities, perhaps there really is a way to unravel the secret of the battle of divine will. Hacksword took a deep breath and slowly closed his eyes. That's how it is. Mask has activated Plan B ahead of time. And as he is prepared, I am unable to determine if he is still alive. When Sky Lord opened his eyes again, he realized that he was in a cramped room. By a king's standards, this room was far from being adequate. Silent Disaster seemed to be explaining the situation, and sitting opposite her was Valkyries, whom he had not seen in a long time. Seeing the Nightmare Lord move again, Hacksword felt as though it had been a lifetime since he last saw it. You're finally here. Valkyries nodded. Take a seat, the coffee is getting cold. After experiencing so many unimaginable events, she is still able to speak in such a relaxed manner. This is indeed her style. Ever since the start of the Western Front, the 3 senior lords had finally gathered together. In the clan, this was a major matter that was worthy of serious consideration. The only one that did not fit in was the human sitting beside the Nightmare Lord. He had long heard of his name from Silent Disaster, king of Grey Castle, Roland. He was also the main reason why the Western Front plan had failed time and time again. However, it just so happened that they were able to gather together because of each other. This made Hacksword feel rather complicated. He was always lacking in this or that in battle, yet he was able to meet behind the king's back. How ironic. He gave Roland a deep look before walking to Syracuse's side and sitting down. The chair was extremely soft, nearly causing him to sink into it. This gave him the feeling of a ruler's exclusive enjoyment. Sky Lord also noticed that there were many empty paper cups on the short table. He had only entered the realm of mind a few seconds ago, but the three of them seemed to have been talking for a long time. Is that what Syracuse is drinking? That's strange. She clearly doesn't need any food other than the red mist. If I'm not wrong, all of you should have a clear understanding of the current situation. Hacksword suppressed his distracting thoughts and focused on the matter at hand. I didn't suggest for Silent Disaster to explain herself because it would waste the little time we have, but she insisted. At this point, he glanced at the Nightmare Lord. Once the deity of gods descends, most of the human kingdoms will be destroyed by landslides and earthquakes. Escaping is the only way to survive. How much time do we have? Roland asked. Chapter 1445. 7 days. Roland silently calculated the speed that lightning had observed and realized that it had far exceeded the scope of a weapon. Wait a minute, are you planning to flatten the entire fertile plains? This period of time was enough to turn the deity of gods into a calamity. By then, not only would the entire plains be destroyed, even the land of Dawn and the Blackstone region would be severely affected. A floating island with a diameter of dozens of kilometers falling from a height of tens of thousands of meters would form a shockwave that would revolve around a planet several times. The drastic changes in the landscape would trigger earthquakes and tsunamis. In the face of such a calamity, even the demons would find it hard to escape. If the fertile plains were smashed into a basin, seawater would flow in reverse, and all life in the land of Dawn would be wiped out, so where could they run to? With the heavenly sea realm closing in on them, the demons' original plan was to seize the human territories to stall for time. This was a fundamental conflict with their strategic goals. Hacksword looked at him in surprise. You are actually able to clearly understand the effects of the second plan. This will save me a lot of effort in explaining. Of course, the deity of gods will not continue rising. It will probably hover in 2 days and move towards the east of Grey Castle. If Mask didn't lie when he formulated the plan, it will ultimately land near the sea. This way, we can destroy your kingdom and preserve the 2 gods' stone mines to the greatest extent. It was a truly meticulous plan. Roland maintained his composure on the surface, but his heart was extremely heavy. When he knew that the 2 senior lords had appeared, he knew that something major had happened, to the point that he could not wait for the time needed to receive the letter. This was also the reason why he took the risk to return to the hillside. But he never expected that the news would be so bad. If Hacksword and Syracuse were willing to cooperate, destroying the core of the deity of gods would not be difficult. But the problem was that the nuclear weapons detonator was not mass-produced in a factory. Even with sufficient raw materials, assembling it would require several weeks. The prototype bomb that was detonated in the outer sea of the Kingdom of Dawn was the product of the Ministry of Industry's efforts, and the new warhead was still being manufactured in Neverwinter's high-energy laboratory. No matter how fast they worked, it was impossible to bring it to the Kingdom of Dawn. Taking a step back, even if he did not experiment in the Kingdom of Dawn, it would take at least a day for the detonator to be installed in the deity of gods. And that was enough for the floating continent to accumulate enough power to destroy half of the Kingdom of Dawn. Why didn't you do it from the start? If you can defeat the humans with a god's stone mine, you shouldn't have waited until today. What do you think the deity of gods is? Hacksword snapped. Let's not talk about the difficulty of combining the magic core with the birth tower. Just finding a large god's stone mine is rare enough. The reason why it only rises for 2 days is that the god's stone will wither after 2 days. Judging from the mineral reserves in Hermes, it doesn't even qualify for Plan 2. As expected, it's because of the limited magic power consumption. Since Mask can control it, others should be able to as well. Thoughts raced through Roland's mind. Haven't you tried it before? Human, you're wasting time. Hacksword's tone was filled with impatience. Even the creator of the core device, the underground civilization, did not manage to popularize such complicated things. Although my race has received the legacy, it doesn't mean that everyone has such talent. Furthermore, you have not received any legacy at all. Take advantage of the time, run for your lives. I'm not going anywhere. You. Roland raised his drink and deflected Sky Lord's anger. He took a sip before saying solemnly, there are millions of people in Grey Castle and the Kingdom of Dawn. There's no time to move them to the fjords. Furthermore, without Neverwinter, humans will not be able to stop the Sky Sea Realm's enemies from the sea. What's the point of me surviving alone? It's just a matter of time. He paused. And don't forget, as long as the Battle of Divine Will doesn't end, you won't be able to escape destruction. Is that the outcome you want? What's the point of saying it so nicely? Hacksword said disdainfully. If not for Valkyries, I wouldn't even be talking to you about this. I can't deny that this information is crucial. I should thank you for that. Roland said frankly. But what you said isn't entirely correct. There's more than one way to receive the legacy. What do you mean? For example, Valkyries is currently receiving the human's legacy. He looked at the King of Nightmares. Am I right? Valkyries, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. I don't deny that. What kind of riddles are you talking about? Sky Lord was displeased. To put it simply, the essence of the legacy is to accept everything the other party knows. Teaching, learning, merging, and mastering. This in itself is a form of legacy. Valkyries said slowly. Actually, if you think about it from another perspective, the legacy doesn't require the death of the inheritor. That is just a rule of God. I'm not human, but that doesn't prevent me from learning and grasping their knowledge. In fact, I've learned a lot during my time in the dream world. Having said that, she turned to look at Roland. You knew all this long ago? It's not too early. Roland nodded. But after seeing your proficiency in using your cell phone to purchase specialties from the Kargard Peninsula, it further confirmed my guess. Even if I were to meet with misfortune, the witches who entered the dream world would definitely be able to spread this knowledge. Enough. What has this got to do with the deity of gods? Hacksword bellowed. It's true that humans have never obtained the legacy shards of the underground civilization, but by studying the ruins they left behind, it's not impossible to adjust the core instrument of the deity of gods. Roland said sternly. In fact, the Union has done research on this, and there are still a few witches who possess the relevant knowledge. I don't know if they can successfully stop the magic power core, but compared to fleeing or destroying the obelisk, this is undoubtedly a method worth trying. Sky Lord finally understood what he meant. Are there really humans who can do that? Although their appearances are somewhat strange, they are undoubtedly humans. You're gambling. No, this is a choice without any other choice. From the beginning, Roland had never considered escaping alone. I also agree with this method. Valkyries said solemnly. Now that the bottomless land is occupied by the Sky Sea Realm, and King's City is constantly closing in, without sufficient troops, heading to the origin of magic is just empty talk. Since the outcome can't be any worse, there's no harm in taking a gamble. Hearing Nightmare Lord's words, Hacksword sullenly shut his mouth. Since that's the case, let us discuss the plan to seize the deity of gods, Roland said. Chapter 1446. 2 days later, the deity of gods finally rose to a height of nearly 5,000 meters. From afar, it looked like a mountain cone stuck in the clouds, casting a shadow that covered a third of the Kingdom of Dawn and brought forward the afternoon dusk by a few hours. If not for the higher-ups being prepared, ordering the civilians to not go out and imposing martial law in the various cities, just this phenomenon alone would have caused order to collapse. After that, the deity of gods slowly moved towards the southeast of Grey Castle. The moving shadow outline created a distinct twilight line on the ground. Although Silent Disaster and Sky Lord were unable to control the core instruments, they had no problem shutting off the red mist valve. That was the only good news, at least it would not scatter red mist everywhere. Other than monitoring the movements of the deity of gods, the Witch Union and the administrative office of Grey Castle did not slack off. With the cooperation of both parties, they traversed more than half of Grey Castle in a short span of 2 days, sending a magic power core and the relevant operators to the route that the floating island would take. After opening the sealed wooden crate, Roland met Celine in the temporary warehouse in the camp. Phew! Even if the carrier doesn't need to breathe, the sensation of being transported in such a narrow space is unbearable. She unfurled all the tentacles on her body, as though she was stretching her body. "It's been hard on you," Roland said sincerely. Of course, he knew what it felt like to be sealed in a wooden crate, especially for people with claustrophobia. The experience was definitely enough to drive them crazy. If not for the urgency of time and the large bomber that could transport heavy loads was still being assembled, he would not have used such a method to transport the ancient witches. Compared to the sufferings in the past, this bit of discomfort is still acceptable. Celine turned left and right. "Come to think of it, I'm even more surprised that you want to cooperate with the demons. Your Majesty." She bent her main tentacle and suppressed the voice in her consciousness to the minimum. "Are you sure you want to do this? They are enemies without any humanity or pity, and deception is a common occurrence to them. To be honest, if not for your suggestion, Aletheia would definitely have refused to accept the order." "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing," Roland replied seriously in his consciousness. The deity of gods must not land in the territory of the 4 kingdoms. We cannot afford such a loss. Choosing the lesser of 2 evils is a choice that the 3 chiefs often have to make. Celine's voice suddenly became much softer. "I trust your judgment." "Fortunately, Aletheia is not the one operating the core instrument," Roland said with a bitter smile. "Otherwise, I would have a headache." "That's where you're wrong." Celine smiled. She did complain a lot after hearing this, but it was Aletheia herself who stuffed me into the box. Roland was stunned, and he couldn't help but feel a warm current in his heart. "All right, where's the senior devil you mentioned? I couldn't wait to board that floating city." "Ah." This reaction was slightly out of his expectations. "You actually want to go up?" "Of course." This was a chance to research a brand new core. Using the God's Stone of Retaliation to gather magic power and transform it into a super buoyant force, just thinking about it made people excited. Celine's tone suddenly changed. "What's more, it's a city of demons, a city. During the entire battle of divine will, no one had ever managed to break into a demon city, let alone occupy it." "All right, what you said does make sense." Roland turned and walked towards a corner of the warehouse. "Follow me." After passing through a specially made door, Hacksword and Sarakas were waiting in the middle of the room for the operation to begin. They were surrounded by dozens of God's punishment witches, and both sides stared at each other. Although they were cooperating, neither side could feel at ease. "This is..." The moment he saw Celine, Hacksword raised his brows in surprise. "The carrier of the underground civilization? A witch fused with it? Haven't you done similar experiments?" Roland asked curiously. Only Nasipel would willingly turn himself into a monster. Sky Lord didn't seem to want to continue on this topic. "Since you're ready, let's begin. The details of the operation have already been discussed. Now that everyone is here, I will repeat the main steps." Roland looked around. The core that controls the deity of gods is located at the bottom of the obelisk. It's filled with red mist, so the main operators are the gods' punishment witches and the First Army. The possible enemies are the symbiotic demons, which are also monstrous beasts. Therefore, do not advance rashly. The First Army will set up defense points at key locations, and only approach the core after the surroundings are safe. The main mission of the gods' punishment witches is to protect Celine, so I'll leave this to the 2 of you. His gaze landed on Phyllis and Zoe. The 2 bowed in unison. According to Hacksword, due to the early implementation of Plan B, There were currently hundreds of thousands of inferior demons and thousands of mad demons that had yet to leave. They obeyed the senior lord and did not pose much of a hindrance. As for the senior demons that obeyed Mask, they had already been convinced by silent disaster. The only thing that could not be controlled were the monstrous beasts that had been created. Even though Hacksword had already closed the door to the hatchery, no one knew how many guardians were still roaming the city. Then, set off. Roland ordered. Hacksword snapped his fingers, and a dark magic screen unfolded behind him. At the same time, a veil-like red mist surged out. The two senior lords were the first to disappear into the distortion door. Next were the gods Punishment Witches and Celine. Following that, the side door of the warehouse opened, and 1,000 soldiers carrying all kinds of equipment entered the portal. The plan to seize the city had officially begun. This is the interior of the demon city. Celine could not help but sigh. This was the first time she had stepped into the enemy's core area, and it was also the first time she had seen the obelisk at such a close distance. Even though she knew that it was extremely large, she still felt a little shocked when she saw it up close. Especially when they were at the bottom of the huge crater. This red mist tower that rose from the mist lake and was hundreds of meters wide was like a pillar that supported the heavens. "What do you plan to do?" Phyllis asked as she looked around warily. "First, I have to connect my perception to the control core." She looked at the magic core that revolved around the obelisk above her head. The core instrument can change its structure to achieve different abilities. As for whether to use insight or balance to connect, we will only know after trying. Balance? Isn't that the name of the magic stone? In a sense, there is not much difference between the magic core and the magic stone. The biggest difference is the scale and the degree of complexity. In fact, after reading Miss Isabella's research manuscript, I even feel that witches are not that different from them. We all use the same method to drive magic power. Phyllis was silent for a moment, then skipped this topic. What happens after I connect it? Once I connect it, I will be able to further analyze the demon's core structure, just like how I used the magic stone to analyze the witch's abilities. His Majesty's request is for it to land smoothly, so I should be able to achieve that by slowing down its effects. This is much easier than creating a new ability. "Lady Phyllis, Lady Celine," Brian said as he walked over. "The First Army has finished setting up the defense. The rest is up to you." Celine nodded and then inserted the main tentacle into the magic core that she had brought with her. Soon, the core began to emit a dazzling blue light. It slowly stood up from its inverted state and floated in the air. A thin thread silently appeared, slowly crawling toward the obelisk. This peculiar scene attracted everyone's attention. It was like a spider's silk hanging above the red mist lake, as if it had existed for a long time and only now revealed its outline. Chapter 1447. The connection process was much smoother than expected. After the cores were synchronized, Celine saw the interior of the obelisk, or rather, the control system as a whole. It consisted of the 4 magic power cores, the obelisk itself, and the parent body beneath it, forming an extremely ingenious system. Magic power reverberated throughout the system, constantly emitting harmonious ripples. After some pondering, she gained a deeper understanding of the system. The 4 cores used different abilities to maintain the deity of God's operations, and the one controlling them was the parent body beneath the obelisk. Of course, it was not entirely accurate. From the flow of magic power, it could be seen that the parent body only had a transformative function, like the control lever on the fire of heaven. As for the lever activating the gears, valves, or steel cables, they were all internally set up. The crux was that it greatly simplified the complexity of the operation. Celine usually needed to spend a lot of time controlling a single core, much less controlling 4 at the same time. But after such an inconceivable transformation, it seemed feasible. She had to admit that Nasipel, who came up with such a system, was a genius. If not for Roland's extensive knowledge of the dream world, she might not have been able to comprehend it, much less replicate the same system. But this also made Celine suspicious. The Union had previously observed the parent body's records, and it was clearly a mutated demon, similar to the chaos beasts that produced magic stones. Since it was a living creature, it should have its own consciousness, which would undoubtedly obstruct the control. How did the senior demon lord turn it into a completely obedient tool? In addition, from the perspective of the system, the obelisk itself did not seem to be important. It was more of a receiving and amplifying function. As the key item that the demons relied on to survive, it did not belong to the deity of gods. This was somewhat different from what she had imagined before connecting to it. With a strong sense of curiosity, Celine extended her consciousness to the demon matrix. In that instant, an inconceivable scene appeared in front of her. Oh my God! She could not help but let out a gasp. It was a gigantic net. In the net that was formed from numerous glowing lines, there were many flickering nodes. She realized that they were the demons' cities, and the region where they were concentrated was the continent opposite the Land of Dawn, the Blackstone region. Not only that, but Celine also saw many dimmer nodes scattered outside the net, like pearls that had lost their luster. What shocked Celine even more was that there was an inexplicably familiar feeling inside the mother's body. She entered without any obstruction, as if this was just a place she frequented. Carrier. Celine reacted quickly. That's right, even though it was still a type of devil, it had become something similar to a carrier through the modifications. It no longer had its own consciousness and could only act according to certain instincts. That was the key to its ability as a control center. Without a doubt, this technique was closely related to the underground civilization. So that's what happened. Celine had a very complicated feeling in her heart. It was the thrill of discovering a new technology and the chill of seeing a corner behind the scenes. With the help of the technology of the extinct races, the Witch Union implemented the transformation plan of the gods' punishment witches. As demons who had absorbed the inheritance shard, how could they not take advantage of this? As it turned out, they were far ahead of the Union. But what puzzled her was that the modifications were likely to allow them to control multiple core instruments, allowing them to display astonishing effects. Other than the deity of gods, there was no need for other cities to achieve such a feat after all. The matter was fraught with risk, not to mention that it was equivalent to depriving the modified of their consciousness. And the mother body was responsible for the growth of the obelisk, so its importance to the demon race was self-evident, and its position was definitely not low. But she saw that the mother bodies that represented the city nodes had more or less undergone modifications and were in the process of transforming into vessels, which was somewhat illogical. Does the king not care about the lives of the demons in the city? Done admiring? An unfamiliar voice suddenly sounded behind her. Celine jumped in fright as she turned around to see a strange demon appear before her eyes. It did not have the humanoid appearance of a senior demon. Its lower body resembled a reptile, and its upper body had more than 10 hands that were of various shapes and sizes. The most eye-catching part was its head, which was like a deformed pillar with many masks hanging from it. Only then did she realize that she could actually turn around in her consciousness. Unknowingly, she was no longer a light soul, but a body with weight. I didn't expect anyone other than me to be able to enter this place. The other party's voice was filled with joy. It seems like you are the same as me, abandoning your original body and not being bound by any rules, all for the sake of seeking knowledge and truth. How is it? Are my works to your satisfaction? There was no need to ask. This demon was definitely the senior Lord Mask that Skydome had mentioned, Nasapel. Why can I see my own appearance? What did you do? You should be able to guess. Mask proudly spread out his hands. Isn't this very similar to the realm of mind? Celine's expression changed. Could it be that you, that's right, this is the realm of mind that I created? He let out a series of mixed laughter. Why does one need talent to explore the origin of magic? Why can some people enter and leave at will, while others can't even touch it? What I hate the most are those guys who are born extraordinary. That's not right. That's not right. Celine calmed her heart and carefully recalled her companion's descriptions of the dream world. If one wants to see themselves, a mirror can do it. The realm of mind can accurately reflect all living things, but other than a glowing net, there is nothing here. And most importantly, I only see the appearance of a carrier, and not the real me. What's so bad about being a carrier? If not for this body, you won't even be able to control the magic power core. Mask snorted. The realm of mind is just a name. No one can dictate what it must be like, although this is indeed a byproduct of an experiment. As for what I've really done, isn't that something that's obvious at a glance? He walked towards Celine and passed through her. Of course, that is to escape the shackles of a shell and become an existence that transcends everything. Celine was momentarily dumbfounded. Every body has its limits. There is no perfect body in this world. Since that's the case, why should I continue on this hopeless path? Do you see this net? Mask's voice grew louder and louder. Through it, I can be everywhere. This is more powerful than any other body. When it develops to a certain extent, I can even exist in multiple places at the same time. Or rather, I can create countless me's. With this, I can head to the most dangerous places and conduct the most dangerous experiments. I can explore all the mysteries of the world without any apprehensions. You should know what this means. Nasapel raised his hands high. All feelings, experiences, and knowledge will belong to me. This efficiency of absorbing knowledge will definitely allow me to evolve. It doesn't require talent and has nothing to do with magic stones. Isn't this the dream of all those who seek knowledge? This guy is crazy. She finally understood why the mother cities that did not become the deity of gods underwent the transformation of carriers. It was not the intentions of the Demon King. Instead, it was Mask's doing. Looks like you realized it too. Nasapel took off one of the masks and revealed a female's face. On that face, the corners of his mouth were curled up stiffly. After leaving the realm of mind, the senior lords are nothing more than this. And the king, even in the presiding Holy See, he did not realize the minute differences between the participants and me. They are too reliant on their abilities. But you will not have the chance to bring this information out. Stay here and become a part of me. As soon as it finished speaking, the 4 cores abruptly stopped operating. Chapter 1448. No, stop. Celine cried out in astonishment. Once the magic power circulation was stopped, the deity of gods would become a dead mountain that could no longer float. This is my ability. Nasapel spoke with fervor and assurance. Even without my body here, I can control the magic power core from a distance through the net. It did not exist from the beginning, but was created bit by bit after I received the legacy. It does not require the support of talent, and it will not differ from person to person. The current net is obviously incomparable to the realm of mind, but what about centuries or millennia later? You must know that I, who has broken free from the restraints of my body, do not lack time. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Following the stillness of the core, the interior of the deity of gods began to tremble violently. The soldiers stationed around the promotion plaza found it difficult to stand steadily, and many of them were caught off guard and fell to the ground. The deity of gods is descending. Silent Disaster said in a deep voice. Damn it, what's going on? Hacksword roared at Celine. Hey, witch. Answer me. Mask is interfering with the operation of the core instrument. We need to sever its connection. Celine shouted a few times, but realized that the other party was unable to hear her consciousness. She could sense the changes in the outside world, but she had lost the ability to communicate with the outside world, as though there was a transparent glass wall between them. You are in the body of the Mother of Soul, and that carrier is just an empty shell. How can they hear your warning? Mask said with a ruminating look. And how can it be so easy to sever the connection? In my race, the Mother of Soul's position is second only to the king, and is on par with the senior lord. This is not only reflected in the magic power level, but also in the strength of its body. Not to mention the thick layer of red mist covering it, it is not an easy task to kill it. Furthermore, without the Mother of Soul, how are you going to control the core instrument? Therefore, the outcome will not change. There are hundreds of thousands of your kind in this city. Do you want to send them to their graves? I truly did not know that a witch from the Union era would actually sympathize with a demon. Nasipel sneered. Besides, they are just traitors who sided with Haxord. Their deaths are not to be regretted. As for those symbiotic demons, it would be a waste to destroy them along with the deity of gods. But as long as I spend more time, I can create more. If you want me to change my mind, you better think of a more convincing reason. There is not much time left for the bugs outside. How did this monster know that she was from the Union era? Celine was very surprised, but she had no time to think about such trivial matters. What about the god's stone of retaliation? If the floating island crashes here, Hermes and Greycastle's western border will also be affected. Are you sure the king won't punish you for this? Sky Lord sure is thorough. Nasipel did not seem to mind. But exterminating humans is undoubtedly a higher priority. Your Majesty will definitely understand my difficulties. After all, there was a traitor among the great dark monarchs. They had to pay the price. A small price to pay? Isn't the god's stone of retaliation the foundation of the Red Mist Tower? Without sufficient red mist, you will not be able to establish a foothold on the fertile plains. How are you going to stop the Sky-Sea realm that is following closely behind? This reason is more substantial than the previous one. Mask did not refute it. But you have neglected 2 points. Firstly, the symbiotic demons have a much lower need for red mist than primal demons and junior demons. No matter how scarce the resources are, they will not complain. Secondly, I have sufficient confidence in the humans. What does confidence mean? Celine gritted her teeth and asked. I have indeed underestimated Osruk's talent. Humans have slow progress in magic power, but have displayed astonishing achievements in another direction. I am completely confident that if I were to obtain your inheritance and combine it with my technology, dealing with the Sky-Sea realm will not be a difficult task. In other words, even without the 2 gods' stone of retaliation mines, I can still win the battle of divine will. Celine realized that no matter what she said, the other party would not change his mind. From the beginning, he was only toying with her. He was like a hunter toying with his prey. With the information unable to be sent out, she could only rely on herself to prevent the disaster. Look, there's no time left. Nasipel looked into the distance. The magic power that was supporting the deity of gods had finally disappeared, and the slow descent gradually turned into a true descent. Under such a drastic change, the soldiers were no longer able to maintain standing and could only try their best to lie on the ground. I heard that when an object falls, the person standing on it will also fly up. I wonder if I can witness such a scene? How can I reactivate the cores? Celine forced herself to focus. Mask was not in the deity of gods, and he was connected to it through the network. If I can expel him, I might be able to restore the magic power cores to normal. She attempted to extend her consciousness into the 4 cores, but she instantly suffered a backlash. It was an extremely complicated cyclone scene. Every cyclone was comparable to the one in Divine Wrath mode, and the 4 of them influenced each other to form an even more compact magic power cyclone. Ignoring the fact that she had to analyze all 4 at the same time, just dealing with one would require a large amount of time. This is what art is, isn't it? Nasipel enlarged the cyclone scene, and immediately, a grand, star vortex structure appeared above their heads. Magic power interweaved within, making it dazzling. To calculate it, I spent nearly a century, and 2/3 of my brains have been constantly dealing with related problems. The other senior lords think of me as a monster. What a joke! If I did not modify my body and absorb many brains, how could I achieve all of this? Looking at the galaxy-like vortex, Celine felt a tinge of despair. At the same time, she sensed that Mask was taking advantage of her concentration on the cores to corrode her body. But Celine did not have any thoughts of resisting. If she could not change everything, the Union, and even the hope of all humanity would be destroyed. So what difference did it make to who possessed her? Quickly think of a way. Roland's figure surfaced in her mind. creating a ray of hope from the impossible. It was this man who gave hope to the tequila survivors. But she quickly rejected the idea. Masks, network, and the realm of mind were two completely different things. It was impossible for her to obtain His Majesty's help here. What else could help her analyze the star vortex? Thinking back to the past, what did she do when she converted the core apparatus into divine wrath mode? A bolt of lightning suddenly flashed through Celine's mind. She suddenly lowered her head to look at the flickering network. It was a technology created by the underground civilization, and the gray dots outside the network were likely magic power cores that had yet to be connected. Such a core existed in Neverwinter as well. Since she was able to use the core apparatus to connect to the deity of God's control hub, the other cores were undoubtedly able to do the same. Of course, the distance was the greatest problem, but from another perspective, she might be able to use the control hub to connect to the other cores. Then get Pasha and Aletheia to help her? No, they are of no use to the situation. The only thing she could pin her hopes on was one person. One of the 3 chiefs who had assisted her in handling the large number of core calculations. Lady Eleanor. As for whether Eleanor, who had long lost her consciousness and had fused with the control hub, could respond to her call, Celine did not have the time to care. This thought was like a ray of light in the darkness. Regardless of the outcome, she had to attempt to grasp it. She once again focused all her attention and placed her target on the obelisk. This time, she did not need to analyze it. All she needed to do was to increase the amount of magic power she injected. What are you trying to do? Nasipel continued to devour her consciousness as he spoke unhurriedly. Are you trying to expand the range of the network? Incomprehensible. Without the Mother of Soul or the corresponding carrier, those nodes will not change without reason. Even the king has to first fuse with the magic power core before he can control this astonishing power. Is that so? But I happen to know of one such person. Celine used all her strength to send her consciousness out along the network. Adjust the core mode, change it to balance. In that instant, the obelisk emitted a hum that ordinary people could not hear. The intense magic power undulations caused the entire network to flicker, as though it would extinguish at any moment. However, the cluster of magic power heading west was as bright as the sun. Chapter 1449. Grey Castle, City of Neverwinter. As usual, astrologer of Dispersion Star and his colleagues were calculating the design drafts sent by the Ministry of Industry. This seemed to be a never-ending job, but it was surprisingly fulfilling. Different from observing the stars, every result they measured would determine the direction of the design and eventually turn it into a visible result. Although he often used a new telescope to look at the starry sky in his spare time, he had been focusing more and more on the Arithmetic Academy in the past 2 years. The more he calculated, the more he understood His Majesty's words about using numbers to describe all things. Astrologers did not know much about manufacturing, but if the curves or line segments depicted by the numbers looked very coordinated, the relevant design results would most likely be finalized. There seemed to be a strange connection between the two. Sometimes, he could not even tell whether the creation determined the number or the number determined the creation. If he could master it to a certain extent, would he be able to determine the characteristics of an unknown object just by a string of numbers and formulas? It was this wonderful association that made him look forward to it every day. The result of the 26th item is 3,475, which is out of the limit, the assistant reported after carefully pressing on the mechanical calculator. This thing was very rare. Princess Anna made it by hand, and there were less than 10 of them in Neverwinter. Most of them were allocated to the Administrative Office and the Arithmetic Academy. Astrologer of Dispersion Star nodded. When he was about to write it down in his notebook, the light above his head suddenly flickered. The light bulb sizzled as if it had malfunctioned. Everyone stopped what they were doing and waited for the light to return to normal. Clang! A crisp sound came from the next room, as if something had fallen to the ground. The astrologer of Dispersion Star frowned. He knew that the ancient witch's important instruments were kept in that room and had repeatedly told the apprentices to be careful when cleaning. How could they be so careless? However, he did not expect that the culprit would quickly rush out of the room and run towards him in panic. My lord. The skeleton is floating. What? Astrologer of Dispersion Star raised his eyebrows and hurriedly walked to the door. Then he widened his eyes in surprise. The tightly closed skeleton had completely opened up as if it was changing its shape. A dazzling light bloomed from its center as if it had just woken up from a deep sleep. How was this possible? Only a few people in the Arithmetic Academy knew about the existence of carriers. Except for the ancient witches who were in the form of sarcomas, no one could use these magic objects. They dug a secret tunnel under the Arithmetic Academy to place the central carrier. It was because of this that such a thing was stored in the Arithmetic Academy. The light didn't last long. After a dozen breaths, the skeleton returned to its sealed state and slowly descended to the ground. Sir, I only used a wet rag to wipe the dust off it. I definitely didn't do anything else to it. The acolyte who failed explained in a panic. There's nothing for you to do here. You can leave now, Astrologer of Dispersion Star said, pretending to be calm. When the door was closed, he took out a special key from his pocket. That was the only way to go underground. There was more than one sarcoma-shaped ancient witch, but the one underground was different. It was said that she had no consciousness and only had the ability to answer questions, so she had to be chained to prevent accidents. Astrologer of Dispersion Star was no stranger to her. She had contributed greatly to the verification of the calculation results in the past. However, he didn't forget Lady Pasha's warning. Once she broke free, she could easily tear apart anyone who approached her with the power of the carrier. He had to make sure that the accident just now wasn't caused by her. However, to Dispersion Star's shock, the central carrier didn't leave its original position. Instead, it slumped down, its tentacles twisting and entangling together, showing no signs of movement. Oh no, how could this happen? Dispersion Star knew that the problem was far beyond his ability to solve. He turned around abruptly and ran to the ground while shouting, "Someone, go to the castle and inform Lady Scroll." The burst of light soon dissipated. The gray dot lit up for a few seconds before extinguishing like a short-lived fire. Did I fail? Celine looked at the net in silence. For a moment, she was clearly connected to the magic core, but why didn't the light continue? She originally planned to use the equilibrium mode to connect the two ends and have Lady Eleanor analyze the 4 core instruments, but now, her hopes seemed to have dwindled. Even if she wanted to try again, she found it hard to concentrate. The corrosion of mask was gradually affecting her mind. Without the support of the god's stone mine, the net can't last long. It ultimately requires magic power to operate. Otherwise, why do you think I allowed the magic core to wander outside? Nasipel shrugged. Although it is incomprehensible, your willpower is commendable. I will accept your soul and knowledge. I will not allow such a thing. Suddenly, a voice that didn't belong to either of them appeared in the space of consciousness. Celine froze for a moment. The voice sounded familiar, with an indescribable sense of familiarity mixed in with the unfamiliarity. She turned around and saw a woman standing silently behind Nasipel. Her long hair nearly reached her ankles, and her brows were exquisite like a painting. Her half-opened gray eyes had a trace of indolence that couldn't be erased, making her a stark contrast to the other 2 members of the 3 chiefs. Lady Eleanor. Celine blurted out. She almost couldn't believe her eyes. After more than 400 years, she was once again seeing the leader of the Union. You are Celine, right? I remember your voice. And this fellow is undoubtedly a high-level demon. Eleanor scanned the surroundings. What is this place? Is it a new soul vessel? I will tell you everything later, but there's no time to explain now. Celine said anxiously. Please help me reactivate the magic core and expel this demon. Any later and it will be too late. Ha, ha, Mask laughed out loud. I was wondering what you had done. So it's an extra gift. Is this female very strong? It's a pity that I don't have a corporeal body, so my combat abilities are useless here. As for analyzing the 4 cores, it's even more laughable. In terms of calculation, halfway through his sentence, Nasipel's smile froze on his face. He clearly saw that the star vortex above his head was undergoing changes. First, a few blobs of light suddenly appeared, followed by the rapid expansion of the assimilated region. It was as though a waterfall was flowing in the opposite direction, forcefully suppressing the rotation of the star vortex and forcing it to rotate in the opposite direction. With the two forces intertwining, the four cores once again blossomed with dazzling light. The deity of gods that had regained the ability to ascend entered a state of rapid deceleration. The dispersing red mist began to shrink inwards, and the surface of the red mist lake, which had a tendency to boil, once again became crystallized. As for the first army soldiers in the promotion plaza, they were all pressed to the ground, unable to move. "Who are you?" Nasipel was stunned. How can a single person understand the structure of the magic cyclone so quickly? It's impossible for a single person to do it. Eleanor extended her hand above her head, as though she was touching the magnificent magic image. "But I'm not alone." With a loud boom, the surrounding light was extinguished. The net and the other nodes vanished without a trace, leaving only the deity of gods in the darkness, flickering persistently. Celine realized that the control hub they were in had lost its connection with the net. Chapter 1450. The rumbling space suddenly quietened down. Everything in the outside world seemed to have distanced themselves from the two of them. Looking at the woman in front of her, Celine almost could not hold back her tears, even though her body no longer possessed the ability to shed tears. She wanted to hug the other party, but halfway through, she saw her rough tentacles and stopped in midair. Instead, the other party took the initiative to approach and held onto her tentacles without hesitation. "It's not my first time seeing a carrier. What are you shy about?" Her tone was as warm as ever. The familiar voice and appearance made Celine unable to hold back her emotions. She unfurled all her tentacles and pulled Eleanor into her embrace. "Can you tell me the entire story now?" The other party laughed. "My lady, can you first tell me the situation outside?" After calming herself down, Celine recalled her mission. The fact that the space of consciousness still existed proved that the deity of gods did not crash into the ground like the enemy had predicted. However, she still wanted to hear news that the outside was safe and sound. Although it is still falling, it should be able to reduce its speed to a safe range before it crashes. Eleanor paused for a moment. "Come to think of it, this thing is a creation of the demons, right? I saw quite a number of God's punishment witches. We can already attack the enemy's city?" In the end, Alice still succeeded. Celine finally felt relieved. "I'm afraid things are different from what you think, and it will take a long time to explain." Consciousness communication is suitable for a long speech. Eleanor exhaled. "Come, I'm ready." "Yes. Yes." Celine nodded her main tentacles. "Then I will start from the moment you fused with the central carrier." After a long time, she stopped. So that's how it was. When Eleanor spoke again, her tone was filled with emotion. In the end, it wasn't Alice or Natalia who won, but the humans reunited as a whole. "But I'm curious, can there really be such a person among the mortals?" "Yes. We took a long time to accept this. Instead, it was Agatha who had previously recruited ordinary people who adapted quickly. If not for her pulling strings, the process would have been even more tortuous." "Yes. I remember that name." Eleanor blinked. A young genius awakened. "You still remember her," Celine said in surprise. "She's the only witch who can live to this day who still keeps her original appearance." At this point, she hesitated for a moment before asking, "Lady Eleanor, can you recall what you experienced in the central carrier?" The other party shook his head slowly. "In fact, I don't know who I am either. The name Eleanor isn't accurate, because I'm still Xiao Wei, Li Er, Salihi, all the witches that have fused with the central carrier to form the current me." I could remember everything that had happened before the fusion, but it wasn't the same in the hub. It was difficult for me to describe what I felt. Chaos, chaos, it wasn't as simple as not being able to see or hear. It was as if my consciousness had been separated into several parts, with only a small part remaining normal. She pondered for a moment. If I really want to think about it, the only thing I can remember are those arithmetic problems and the analysis of the magic core. Then how did you get here? Celine said in surprise. I'm not sure either. Maybe it's like seeing a beam of light piercing through the chaos. No matter what, you'll run towards it? So that's how it is. To me back then, you were also that beam of light in the darkness. Celine remained silent for a moment before she suppressed the surging emotions in her heart. Thinking back to how the process of her entering this place was abnormally smooth, it was highly likely to be related to the mother of soul that Nasipel had modified. Compared to the central carrier of the underground civilization, this carrier was probably more compatible with their consciousness. This wasn't hard to understand. After all, from the many brains that Mask displayed, his thought processes should be complex and varied. If he was unable to coordinate all these consciousnesses, the first to suffer the backlash would definitely be him. It was precisely because this place was more suitable for Lady Eleanor that she was attracted over the instant the two were connected by magic. Since she still existed after the disappearance of the net, it meant that the Neverwinter carrier had once again become an empty shell, and Eleanor was currently residing within the mother of soul of the demons. After Celine summarized her analysis, the other party nodded in agreement. I think so too. I didn't expect that after such a long time, I would become a demon the moment I opened my eyes. This ending was truly unexpected. However, that Senior Lord Mask's modifications were truly thorough. This body didn't even retain any ability to move, as though it was done intentionally. Being unable to move meant that there was no way to transmit information out of the red mist lake. Naturally, no one would notice the changes at the bottom of the obelisk. As long as the tower continued to produce red mist, the Mother of Soul would definitely be safe and sound. Mask's actions were undoubtedly the blind spot of his own people. As long as we know who you are, it doesn't matter what the vessel is. Celine swayed her main tentacle, her voice filled with irrepressible anticipation. The other fused witches must have acknowledged you, allowing you to reappear as one of the three chiefs. When we return to Neverwinter, Pasha and the others will definitely be overjoyed. I also wish to see them. Eleanor looked into the distance. But I can't go that far. Why? Celine was slightly taken aback. Why? The god's stone beneath the obelisk is nearly depleted and will soon lose its effect. And the Mother of Soul will die along with it. No matter what, it is ultimately a demon and cannot move freely like a carrier. The last thing I can do for you is to let this city slowly fall to the ground. Celine instantly froze. She realized that she had forgotten an extremely important matter. The deity of God's ascension and deceleration were built upon the foundation of overdrawing the god's stone mine. Furthermore, when she enhanced the effects of the obelisk and used the net to connect to the western region, she had depleted the little magic power she had left. Regardless of whether Mask's second plan succeeded or not, it was an irreversible matter. There's nothing to be sad about. Eleanor lowered her eyelids. Your hard work has allowed me to see the world once again, and it's different from 400 years ago. This time, humans are filled with hope. This is already the greatest reward. But, Eleanor extended her hand to interrupt her. Actually, this isn't a bad thing. If I don't appear, everything will be the same. But if I were to return, it might bring about a lot of trouble, and might even be detrimental to the situation. How is that possible? Celine swayed her main tentacle as she retorted. Everyone will only feel excited. You mentioned that the current witches are led by a mortal king, right? If he were to know that 3 chiefs from the Union era had suddenly appeared in the United Front, what would he think? Who would the tequila listen to? Is my opinion the only one? Even if you deny it, it won't dispel this suspicion. As time passes, it will become a crack. As a member of the Quest Society, you usually focus on magic power research, so it's normal for you not to understand such things. So the safest method is to maintain the status quo. Celine was momentarily at a loss for words. Ever since Alice and Natalia perished, I understood one thing. Eleanor sighed. I am a transcendent, but I am not a qualified leader. To an ordinary person, not competing might be an advantage, but it is not suitable to be a guide. When the union was on the verge of breaking apart, I still did not make my own choice. This is essentially a form of evasion. My lady, you don't have to console me. Back then, regardless of whether I supported the Queen of Starfall City or the Sunchaser Queen, it would have turned the situation into a 2-against-1 situation. That way, the union might not have broken apart. However, in the face of this decision that would affect the fate of the entire clan, I finally gave up on expressing my stance, which caused the situation to become irreversible. Her gaze was complicated, and her emotions seemed to have returned to that most difficult moment. Merging with the central carrier was the only compensation I could make. Now that I have gathered everyone's wills and reviewed this matter, I am even more certain of my judgment. I am not suitable for the position of the 3 chiefs. Even if I return, I will not be able to lead all of you to a better position. So, this kind of ending is already very good. Before the obelisk collapses, just accompany me for a little longer. You can chat for as long as you want. Celine took a deep breath. But if I don't do anything now, I will regret it in the future. In any case, I hope that you will speak to Roland in person. Celine, perhaps you are right, but that is for the king. At least he is like you in one respect. If you say you are the most unsuitable of the 3 chiefs, then he is the least king-like king I have ever seen. Chapter 1451. At the same time that the deity of gods fell, there was a commotion below. Hacksword suddenly opened a distortion door and teleported himself and Silent Disaster to Roland, as though he wanted to take him away alone. As for the gods' punishment witches, they surrounded Roland and activated the anti-magic domain. Neither side was willing to back down, and it was as though they were at daggers drawn. If not for Lightning's timely news of the floating island's deceleration, Soraka's would have unsheathed her sword and attacked. This also made Roland realize that although the other party had agreed to cooperate for the time being, they had different demands in terms of benefits. Or it could be said that other than Valkyries, they had yet to truly understand the threat of God. Everything they had done was because of the Nightmare Lord who was trapped in the dream world. But regardless of the process, the deity of God's restoration of stability meant that Celine had successfully obtained control over the core. A calamity had finally been averted. The subsequent reports were basically all good news. The First Army did not suffer any losses, with only 3 injured from the rapid fall. The spider demons that they expected did not appear, and the controlled mad demons did not rebel due to the accident. The entire operation could be said to be a daunting experience without any mishaps. Only when Celine came before Roland without a word did he realize that the situation was not as simple as it seemed. If it were in the past, she would have already started talking about everything she had seen and heard while controlling the deity of gods. And the truth was as he had imagined, or rather, it was even more inconceivable. Mask had actually used the Race Mother and the Magic Power Core as nodes to construct a magic net that spanned across the 2 continents, and through it, he had triggered the sudden fall of the deity of gods. And the key person to turn everything around was actually the ancient witches who were thousands of miles away. To be more precise, they were the ancient witches. Their leader was one of the 3 chiefs of the Union, Eleanor. She wants to see me? Roland asked. To be precise, I want you to see her. Celine poured out her worries. Although she is not a qualified member of the 3 chiefs, we all know the sacrifices and dedication she has made for the Union. Now that she can see the light again, I don't want her to disappear just like that. The deity of gods can't hold on any longer. Roland pondered. Without the divine stones, the obelisk would quickly decay. This had been proven by the Quest Society. The Mother of Soul was the foundation of the entire tower, so it was only a matter of time before it died. The key was to find a new source of mana for the Mother of Soul. He had never done something like this before, and his understanding of the Devil's Matrix was close to 0. If it had been a year or so earlier, he would have been helpless. But now that he had the help of Valkyries and Hacksword, he might be able to change the outcome. Your Majesty, don't worry, Roland comforted. She's the hero who saved Grey Castle and the Kingdom of Dawn. Even if you didn't mention it, I would have done my best to keep her here. Since there was no lack of technical feasibility, the most important thing right now was to change the other party's mind. This was the same principle as treatment. A person with faith would have a higher chance of survival than those who had given up. When it came to arguing, Roland admitted that he had never lost. After ascending the deity of gods, he stood in front of the revolving magic power core and nodded to Celine. This was different from the realm of mind. Roland could not directly connect to it like a carrier, so he could only communicate with Eleanor through Celine. The latter extended his main tentacle and slowly inserted it into the core. Soon, a voice that he had never heard before rang in his mind. "I guess you are the human king. Roland Wimbledon." He closed his eyes and replied in a relaxed tone in his mind. "Nice to meet you for the first time. I'm glad that you were able to escape from the central carrier, Eleanor of the 3 seats. It's a pity that you can't really see me. Right now my body is nothing but an ugly demon. This is only a temporary situation. Since your consciousness can enter here, you will be able to enter the realm of mind one day. There, not only can you return to your original appearance, but you can also see many of your past companions. The dream world. I've heard from Celine that it's an incredible place." Eleanor paused for a moment. "But she should have told you that this city's core mineral vein is about to be depleted. I can't wait until then." "Just wait in another location." Roland went straight to the point. "What? There's a god's stone mine in Neverwinter. I can move you there. Indeed, there is a certain difficulty in terms of technology, such as how to fish you out of the Red Mist Lake and how to send you to Neverwinter without any Red Mist supplies. But I believe that with careful preparations, it can be done. But the price is not small." Eleanor let out a light laugh. "There are no benefits to doing this. Did Celine promise you something?" "Lady Eleanor, I didn't do that," Celine defended herself. "How can there be no benefits?" Roland interrupted her. "Your existence is extremely important to the humans, it's just that you don't realize it." Eleanor was slightly taken aback. "Extremely important?" There's no doubt that Mask is able to use the net to gain control of the core instrument. The core will obviously be an important tool for magic power research in the future, and only you can expel it. Just this point alone is extremely important. Roland spoke with fervor and assurance. Of course, this isn't the most important. He suddenly lowered the speed of his speech and enunciated each word clearly. If the humans also have such a floating city, the war will completely tilt in our favor. This time, it wasn't only Eleanor, even Celine was shocked. "You wish to build the deity of gods? Why not? We don't need to start from scratch. There's a core instrument that Mask has concocted, and a suitable controller. All we're lacking is an obelisk." Roland spread out his hands. "But there's no need for me to raise such a large territory. A floating island of 1 kilometer or 2 is sufficient to take off and land heavy bombers, and can even bring an army directly to the bottomless land. The premise is that you can successfully figure out the structure of the magic power core and use it on the new god's stone mine. I know it won't be easy, but even if you don't succeed in the end, I won't think that you're inferior to Mask. At least you've tried your best, haven't you? You don't think you're qualified to be one of the 3 chiefs? No problem, I'll just give you a new goal. You've even resorted to goading, and it's the kind that doesn't conceal it. At this point, you can't possibly refuse, right?" The voice in his mind suddenly turned silent. After a while, Eleanor sighed. "I finally understand what the king who is the least like a king means." "Ah? What's that?" "No, I didn't say anything." Her voice contained a sense of relief. "It's just that, Mr. Roland, you seem to have misunderstood a premise. Everything you have envisioned is based on the successful transfer of the mother's body. I know it won't be easy, but if you fail, I won't blame you." "Lady Eleanor," Celine exclaimed in delight. "Of course." Roland raised the corner of his mouth. "We all have our own responsibilities. Then quickly decide on a landing spot. This thing won't last much longer. I've already thought of it." He opened his eyes and looked southeast. Regardless of where the deity of gods landed in Grey Castle, it would become a huge obstacle. Only the sea could easily accommodate the inverted mountain. If the landing spot was chosen appropriately, it might even add a subsidiary island to Grey Castle. Let's land near Sea Windshire. Chapter 1452. Eleanor's claim of not being able to hold on for too long was not considered short. The final movement and descent of the deity of gods took about 2 days. Roland also sent the First Army to conduct a detailed investigation of the coast of Seawinshire to ensure that there were no casualties during the descent. 2 days later, at dusk, the bottom of the floating island made contact with the sea surface for the first time. From afar, the huge inverted body seemed to be independent of the sea line, and this was also the last time it would reveal its full appearance. As the inverted body sank into the swirling sea bit by bit, the sea level began to rise rapidly, and the beach outside the port disappeared at a speed visible to the naked eye. The waves surged over the embankment and rushed into the port's warehouses and other facilities. The abandoned ships that remained in the port were pushed back and forth by the artificial tides, and were finally torn to shreds by the violent pull. The crashing of the waves against the land was incessant, and could be heard clearly even from miles away. Roland stood on a safe high ground and witnessed the entire process of the deity of gods entering the sea. After all, such a magnificent scene would probably not happen a second time. His only regret was that he did not know how to recite poems. According to history, if he were to recite a poem at such a time, regardless of his standard, it would be recorded in the annals of history along with his back view. Finally, the afterglow of the setting sun appeared behind the deity of gods once again. It reflected the clear and crystalline waves that resembled a belt of light, passing over the new land and extending all the way to the lowlands of Seawinshire, as though the two had become one. Even though the deity of gods was rather large, it was not worth mentioning when compared to the swirling sea. By the time it was embedded into the seabed and transformed into an island, the tides that flooded the port would recede sooner or later, and the gap between the island and the mainland would become a new sea route. At the same time, it was equivalent to closing the distance between Grey Castle and the Fjord Islands. Roland could already foresee the day when it would become a flourishing commercial island. I never expected the demon's ultimate weapon to become the kingdom's new territory. Nightingale, who was watching with him, sighed. It looks like the map of Grey Castle will have to be rewritten. Compared to that, I'm more concerned about what the demons will do. Phillies, on the other hand, was more concerned about the problems they had to face. If there are no supply stations along the way, it will be difficult for them to return to the ridge of the continent. These can all be resolved through negotiation. We've already taken the first step. At least the outcome isn't too bad. For some reason, Roland suddenly thought of the dream world. In the dream world, the demons all came from a remote peninsula, and the scene in front of him was somewhat familiar. As for this new territory, let's call it the Kargard Peninsula. After that, there were not many twists and turns in the three-party conference. After learning of Mask's shocking plan and that the king already knew what was happening here, Haxord was clearly distracted. He even had Soraka's answer some of his questions on his behalf. Roland could roughly guess Haxord's feelings. No matter what, Sky Lord did not wish to completely fall out with the king before he obtained concrete evidence. Now that he suddenly discovered that the king knew everything they had done, it was equivalent to him having no way out. For Haxord, who pursued caution in everything, it was inevitable that he would feel anxious. In comparison, Silent Disaster was much calmer, as though as long as Valkyries was fine, everything else had nothing to do with her. The plan to deal with the demons left behind in the deity of gods was quickly decided. It was impossible for Roland to agree to them establishing a red mist supply line along the borders of the four kingdoms, and the two senior lords did not care about the lives of the inferior demons. Therefore, the hundreds of thousands of demonless laborers would remain in the new island and take on the subsequent construction plans. Over 1,000 mad demons would enter hibernation to conserve the consumption of red mist and wait for a suitable opportunity to migrate in the future. The obelisk had already entered an irreversible state of withering. Only the red mist lake could supply the red mist, and it would gradually dry up. To the demons who were extremely reliant on the red mist, this place had already become an isolated island. Therefore, after assisting in the transfer of the Mother of Soul, Haxord would bring silent disaster back to Sky City to seize control of the remaining troops. Since his actions were already known to the king, it was never a bad thing to have more power in his hands. From the other party's attitude, it did not seem like he wanted to go against the king. Roland did not plan on forcing the issue. After all, if he were to suddenly go back on his word before the battle, it would easily lead to a disaster. Finally, it was Mask Nasipel. This time, it wasn't just Celine and Eleanor, even the two senior lords had the same opinion, that the other party had to die. According to Haxord, even if he were to evolve to an omnipotent state, it would have nothing to do with his race. The path he chose only existed for himself. Once he succeeded, his race would only exist in name, or in other words, he would completely transform into another species. The problem is that he can switch bodies at will through the net, so how do I completely destroy him? Roland raised the key question. Once his plan succeeds, it will indeed be extremely difficult to achieve, but we are still far from that stage. Celine conveyed Eleanor's words. Before the connection was severed, I could sense the difference in strength between the various nodes, and there were only one or two nodes that could compare to the deity of gods. This female, ancient witch is right. After being glared at by the numerous gods' punishment witches, Haxord quickly corrected himself. After all, Nasipel did everything behind the king's back. It is impossible for him to have the opportunity to modify the Mother of Soul in every city to the same degree. And those nodes that have not been modified sufficiently are likely to be unable to transmit his consciousness. Furthermore, the birth towers that cannot be moved will be destroyed one by the Sky Sea realm, so there aren't many places he can go. At present, I am guessing that Mask is most likely in King's City. It was truly Haxord's style. Roland thought to himself. To destroy Nasipel, he had to destroy King's City. And other than Mask, the king was also in King's City. Although he had expressed his unwillingness to clash with the king, his suggestion had pushed the king into the bullseye. But this plan had won over Roland's heart. He did not wish for the crisis of the deity of gods to happen again in his territory. To strike down King's City in the fertile plains before the enemy could launch a desperate counterattack was undoubtedly the method to minimize the risk. More importantly, Eleanor's appearance had undoubtedly increased the feasibility of the plan. Once he obtained a floating island, he would be able to shorten the range of the Air Knight's troops. This was especially important for the heavy lift bomber project. The most difficult part of the project was the development of a new high-powered engine. According to the plan provided by the Grey Castle Design Bureau, the manufacturing, assembly, and test flight would require at least a year. But with a mobile platform in the air, the main engine could be changed to the Phoenix's 14-cylinder piston engine. As such, the success of the heavy lift bomber project was just around the corner. Fix. Chapter 1453. Hermes in the Old Holy City. Marwain's feelings for the past month could only be described as a roller coaster ride. From the moment the Sky Lord brought him to the deity of gods, he had already made up his mind to cling onto the deity of gods tightly and never let go. What firearms, what iron birds, in the face of a flying city, were not worth mentioning at all. This was a miracle worthy of being worshipped by others. Following that, he swept away his previous decline and tried his best to display his worth. He organized his subjects to work and did not spare any effort in the construction of supply stations. He even received the Sky Lord's commendations several times. This made his position among the many nobles more stable, and he felt like the leader of the masses. But a letter from the north broke Marwain's stable life. He never expected the Sky Lord to place such importance on the seemingly absurd piece of paper. After disappearing for weeks, the first thing he did was for them to immediately head to the foot of Mountain Hermes and the kingdom of Everwinter to wait for a new similar letter. As for who the sender was, how long it would take to arrive, or even the specific location to receive the letter, it was all unknown. Honestly speaking, Marwain was extremely unwilling to leave the deity of gods. Even if there were demons everywhere, they would not deprive him of his position and authority. But it was difficult to defy the senior lord's orders. In the end, he chose the former, not for any other reason but because the old holy city was closer to the deity of gods. At this time, the northern border of the Four Kingdoms was covered in red mist. The people of Grey Castle seemed to be exhausted from resisting the demons. Marwain's life was no different from that of the Duke. Not only did he have many subjects under him, he also had a few nobles following him. But waiting for a secret letter that he did not know when it would arrive was truly worrying. In order to complete the mission as soon as possible, Marwain did not hesitate to risk his subjects escaping and expanded their area of activity. During this period, there were a few cases of people escaping, and he hanged several people as a warning. At the same time, he offered a handsome reward for possible clues, but he never received the letter. If all of that was a matter of luck, then the development of the matter completely exceeded Marwain's expectations. The deity of gods suddenly rose and headed east before disappearing from his vision. This caused the Duke to feel extreme panic. The floating miracle city behind him was his greatest reliance, and without it he could not eat or sleep in peace. What was worse was that the Sky Lord never appeared again, as though he had completely forgotten about the secret letter. Not long after, he heard the news that the floating island had been destroyed by Grey Castle. To be honest, Marwain did not believe such nonsense from the bottom of his heart. That was a floating mountain with a radius of dozens of miles. If the people of Grey Castle had the ability to flatten a mountain, why would they wait until now to use it? Unfortunately, not everyone was as smart as him. For a moment, people's hearts wavered, and he found that he could not control the other nobles. The fact that there was still no news from the Sky Lord intensified the situation. His mood became worse and worse, and apart from drowning his sorrows in wine and women, he almost didn't want to do anything else. His days almost returned to the days when he was in the kingdom of eternal winter. Zack, Zack. When the bottle of wine was finished, Marwain shouted the old butler's name. "My lord, what are your orders?" The butler quickly opened the door to his room. "Find a few more ladies tonight, I want young and beautiful ones," he stammered. "But, you ordered them yesterday, that was yesterday. I am the Duke, this is my authority, do you understand? They should sacrifice everything for me." "I understand." The old butler lowered his head. "Right, the people we sent out, are there any updates?" Marwain did not believe in the nonsense on the streets, but it did not mean that he would not verify it himself. In fact, when the deity of gods left the Hermes Highlands, he had sent several teams to track the target and attempt to figure out where it was headed. But the efficiency of these people was ridiculous, with only a few returning the day before. The old butler shook his head. "At present, we only know that Grey Castle did not engage in battle with the deity of gods. Perhaps in another 2 days, there will be concrete news." "This bunch of lazy fools." Marwain cursed as he opened a new bottle of wine. "All right, you may leave. Then let's wait another 2 days." The red mist was dissipating, and there was no telling when the people of Grey Castle would return. He had to think of a way out for himself. Even if he was no longer around, it did not mean that he was going against the Sky Lord's orders. Whoever obtained the letter, at most, would receive less credit. Of course, the kingdom of eternal winter was not where he wanted to go. It had already been proven that it was unable to withstand the attacks of the people of Grey Castle. Marwain heard from the other senior demons that a new deity of gods was flying towards him. Furthermore, it was the city where the demon king resided, making it the most suitable route of retreat. As long as he followed the route that the demons had previously taken, it should not be difficult to find it. When the time came, he would leave with the most loyal nobles. Night quickly descended, but the lady that Marwain wanted did not appear. This made him burn with rage. It seemed that his old butler was starting to become useless. He waited patiently for another hour. When footsteps came from outside the door, Marwain's curses had already reached his throat. However, the person who opened the door was not the old butler, but a group of filthy subjects. Some of them were holding hoes, while others were carrying poles. They looked like a motley crew. The Duke watched in disbelief as they surged into the house, leaving muddy footprints on the fluffy carpet in the bedroom. The moment he thought about how his mansion was being trampled by a bunch of bastards, he could not help but scream, "Guards, guards!" But Marwain did not receive any response. What interrupted him was a bloody head that belonged to the old butler, Sark. Marwain immediately sobered up from his drunkenness. "What are you doing? Everyone has had enough of your bullying, Marwain Parker," the leader shouted. "Because of your damn order, many people died of exhaustion in the quarry, but you didn't care, and even withheld the wages that should be paid. We are not your servants, nor are we your slaves. Nobles are not superior to commoners. The people of Grey Castle are right. You work for the monster in the day and give your wife and daughter to him at night. You are the real devil. Now surrender and follow us to Grey Castle, or don't even think about leaving this house." "Damn it," Marwain thought bitterly. "These guys have been corrupted by the people of Grey Castle. If I had known this, I would not have let them go outside the old holy city to gather information. I am the Duke. Who dares to touch me?" Marwain warned sternly as he drew his sword from the table. Compared to the weapons in the opponent's hands, this sword was much sharper. Since they could break in without warning, it was obvious that the guards and servants had all betrayed him. He had to get out of this place and contact the other nobles. Then he would gather the night to eliminate this mob. The Duke's title stunned everyone. He was not a commoner like the old butler. The Parker family had ruled Snow Reflection Castle for many generations. To the commoners of Everwinter, his status was unreachable. It was precisely because Marwain knew this that he deliberately put on a high and mighty attitude. He did not believe that any bastard would dare to hurt him. Suddenly, a stone was thrown from the dark and hit him squarely in the side of his face. The sharp pain instantly froze Marwain on the spot. "How dare they?" A white-haired old man rushed out of the crowd and threw himself at him while crying, "Devil, give me back my daughter!" Marwain subconsciously raised his sword and pierced it through the old man's chest. When he came to his senses, the crowd had already surrounded him. The old man's death was like a vent that released the long-suppressed emotions of the crowd. Hose and carrying poles fell on Marwain like raindrops. He could almost hear the sound of his bones breaking. "You lowly commoners, stop." "No, stop, don't hit me, cough cough, I beg you," their voices gradually became softer. The crowd only stopped when the Duke was turned into a pile of mud. "We killed a noble," someone said with a trembling voice. "So what? The King of Grey Castle doesn't recognize nobles. Besides, he was an enemy of Grey Castle. What if the other Everwinter nobles find out? They have horses and armor. If they catch up? What else can we do at this point?" The leader looked around and said, "We're not the only ones being bullied. Since the devil isn't here, why don't we fight them?" another person said in a low voice. "Fight them. Fight them. Then we'll go to Grey Castle." Not long after, the voice spread out and turned into a uniform slogan that surged towards the pitch-black ground outside the house like a torrent. Chapter 1454. The change in attitude and mindset of the two senior lords did not only affect the deity of gods that had turned into an island. Apart from the spark that quietly ignited at the foot of Mount Hermes, the offensive of the Western Front also came to a complete halt due to the disappearance of the source of the red mist. Even though there were still remnants of the monstrous beasts active in the impassable mountain range, when their magic power was depleted, they would forever remain dormant. This greatly reduced the pressure on the First Army, who had set up defenses everywhere, and Cage Mountain was no longer the life and death barrier that had to be protected in the north. In the following week, many troops gradually retreated from the front lines and turned to support Neverwinter's western battlefield. The originally fraught situation immediately became more lively. The return of a large number of troops caused the offensive and defensive situation of the western region to reverse. The newly formed tank units on the ground rampaged through the horde of demonic beasts, encircling the stealthy blade beasts like a sieve. And when the demonic beasts gathered in large numbers, they would suffer from the aerial knight's attacks. The railway nodes and bunkers that had been abandoned were gradually recaptured, and the corpses of mutated beasts that died under the cannons were strewn everywhere. If not for the speed at which they decomposed into black liquid, the entire land would have been filled with the stench of corpses. Although according to Valkyries, the demonic beasts were just the Sky-Sea realm's evolution field and had limited effects on the battlefield, with the true danger still to come, it was undoubtedly important for Neverwinter to stabilize the situation. Since the demons' defensive line was completely lost, the Sky-Sea realm's large-scale invasion of the Land of Dawn was inevitable. Therefore, there was a need for the First Army to concentrate their strength on one point and not spread out to fight on two fronts. Roland heaved a sigh of relief and began his rescue of Eleanor. Even though the birth tower, which was also the obelisk's transplant, had always been Mask's responsibility, the three senior lords had more or less heard of it after so many years. The core link was naturally the modification of the Mother of Soul, allowing it to become one with the new mineral veins. This technique was only known to Mask and the higher ascendants that followed him, but the body that Eleanor had obtained was a complete product, so it was a part that could be skipped. Secondly, the Mother of Soul had to be strong enough to recover after the transplant. This point was easy to understand. The transplant was no different from a bone-breaking injury to the mother, just like a tree. Now that it was Eleanor, the only thing he could do was to trust her. Lastly, the Mother of Soul was not allowed to leave the red mist. In other words, before the steel started transforming the red mist again, it had to be in an environment with an abundance of red mist. This was the most difficult part of the entire rescue operation. Fortunately, Hacksword would be participating in the operation as well. The importance of its distortion door to logistics was self-evident. In this kind of situation, it would be able to display extraordinary effects. After the plan was finalized, the Ministry of Industry was the first to enter. In order to rescue the immobile Eleanor from the Lake of Mist, he had to first figure out her location. The interior of the Deity of Gods was a forbidden zone that witches couldn't step foot into, but the diving suit invented by Rex had achieved an unexpected and miraculous effect. More than 10 groups of Sand Nation people donning diving suits entered the Mist Lake through the suspension cable and finally located Eleanor at a depth of 150 meters. The leader of the group was a man named Simbadi. Next, they had to rely on manpower to slowly peel off the mother's body from the steel and tie it tightly with ropes. Under normal circumstances, the strength of the Mother of Soul was comparable to that of a carrier and was inseparable from the bottom of the steel. But the death of the steel made this feasible. Even if they did not take any measures, the steel would gradually crumble and eventually turn into a pile of rubble. When the mother was hoisted to the surface of the lake, Sky Lord would open a distortion door from below and send Eleanor into a specially made metal box. Along with her was naturally a large amount of red mist. After this step was completed, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. What happened after that was much simpler. Farina was in charge of the steam-powered trucks. Apart from the metal box, the trucks also carried a large number of red mist tanks. They were the nutrients required by the Mother of Soul, as well as Sky Lord's supplies along the way. After passing through a series of distortion doors, the convoy arrived at Neverwinter from Seawinshire in just half a day. If not for Hacksword's insistence on leaving, Roland would have wanted to give him the position of a transport captain. Under the expectant and concerned gazes of all the gods' punishment witches, Fran swallowed the metal box and sent it to the bottom of the North Slope mountain mine. This also meant that the entire rescue operation had come to an end. Under the coordination of the Central Administrative Office, they had mobilized close to 10,000 people from various departments, including many races, to complete the frontline transportation that spanned more than half of Grey Castle. At this point, all Roland could do was wait. North Slope Mountain Mine, God's Stone Mine area. Pasha rolled up a can of red mist and carefully poured it on the root of an ugly monster. It looked like a lump of soft mud with two symmetrical rows of compound eyes on the top of its head. Its body was as big as 3 central carriers. Even without using the stone of measuring, one could feel the powerful magic power contained within the monster's body. This demon, known as the Mother of Soul, was the key to turning the god's stone of punishment pillars into red mist towers. It was said that it would only be born when the magic power in the world reached its peak, which was the start of the battle of divine will. Thus, before obtaining the transplanting technology, the demons could only quietly wait for an opportunity before the descent of the bloody moon. If it was during the Union's era, Pasha would not hesitate to sacrifice her life if she had the chance to kill the Mother of Soul. But now, she was taking care of the Mother of Soul as though she was taking care of a child. Even she found the contrast rather strange. "You're here." A familiar voice suddenly came from behind her. "How's her condition?" Pasha turned around and bent her main tentacle. It was Roland. Apart from the surviving ancient witches of Tequila, he was the one who visited Eleanor the most frequently. "It seems like migration is indeed a painful matter." Roland sighed. Pasha's tone did not sound too dejected. "I hope so." Roland nodded slightly. After the two of them looked at each other for a moment, Pasha broke the silence. "You've already thanked me many times," Roland said helplessly. Ever since the ancient witches knew that the three chiefs and their companions who had joined the central carrier were still alive, their reaction could only be described as passionate. He had also received everyone's gratitude. However, Pasha did not seem to be satisfied with just one thank you. She would say the same thing almost every time she saw him. "Eleanor has contributed greatly to the kingdom of Grey Castle. It's only my duty to save her." It was difficult to hear such emotional words coming from Pasha's mouth. Even Roland could not help but be taken aback for a moment. He tilted his head to look at Pasha, as though trying to read her expression from her tentacles. Unexpectedly, what he saw caused his heart to skip a beat, and he almost cried out in surprise. The symmetrical eyes on the Mother of Soul had opened at some point in time and were silently sizing up the two of them. A new voice sounded in his mind. Pasha's body trembled violently. She used her main tentacle to cover her face. Pasha immediately straightened her main tentacle, and with a whoosh, she pulled herself up to the top of the cave before disappearing into the mine. "She always wanted to be the first to speak to you." Roland's mouth twitched as he muttered in disbelief. "Speaking of which, you woke up just like that?" Eleanor yawned. Roland only managed to reply after a long while. "Alright, it's good that you're fine. Since my duty is done, the next step is to—" Eleanor said lazily. Her tone was matter-of-fact. At this point, Eleanor paused for a moment, and there was a hint of ridicule in her voice. Chapter 1455. It seemed like Celine and the others were right about Eleanor being approachable. If it was Alice, Roland found it hard to imagine that the transcendent leader who exuded an icy aura would say such a thing. I believe you." He waved his hands. The North Slope mountain was connected to a large industrial area. If it suddenly flew up, it would definitely be a disaster. "You should at least wait until I activate the core instrument before you believe me," Eleanor said with some regret. From her tone, it seemed like it was a pity that she could not prove her ability on the spot. Roland had a rough understanding of the three chiefs' temperament. She did not think that she was a qualified leader, but that did not mean that she was ordinary. She had her own pride. Those who could become transcendents were all outstanding people. "Right, when did you wake up?" "About a quarter of an hour ago." "So you were eavesdropping from the start." Roland cursed. "Then why didn't you tell us?" "No one said that I have to tell the world when I wake up," said Eleanor confidently. "Then why did you speak again?" "What else? How much more do you want my juniors to lose face?" The 2 rows of eyes on top of her head rolled upwards, and the massive amount of eye rolling had a majestic feel to it. "It was you who suddenly woke up. That was even more embarrassing." Seeing that Roland was speechless, Eleanor casually changed the topic. "To be honest, I am quite satisfied with you." "Why?" He realized that he could not keep up with her pace. "Because there are no traces of mining here," Eleanor replied. "Now that this area has become one with me, I can feel that these God's stone pillars are basically intact, which proves that you have no intentions of mining them. Does she mean that I did not mine God's stone, so I have no intention of controlling the witches? It took Roland a while to understand the meaning of the other party's words. Celine should have told you about the witch union. Do you not believe her? Of course not. It is just that people are easily deceived by a fabricated facade, especially for a king with unlimited power. Disguising is not a difficult task. Eleanor said methodically. Even if you are like this now, it does not mean that you will be like this in the future. Preparing for a rainy day was something that every leader would consider. If you had your guard up, it would be impossible for you not to have designs on this God's stone mine. Secretly arranging for mining and storage, in order to prevent the witches from becoming uncontrollable in the future, while maintaining a friendly face on the surface. Wasn't this a common situation in the past? Roland sighed. That's because too many people regard witches as aliens. But in my eyes, they're just humans with unique advantages in certain aspects. It doesn't matter even if witches occupy the entire upper echelons of the kingdom. What you really want to ask is Alice's opinion, right? Roland said straightforwardly, as long as the human race can continue, the witches will definitely be able to return to the peak. They even told you this? For the first time, Eleanor looked surprised. No, this is what I saw from the mark of time. Roland had a calm expression. Actually, Alice fell into the same misconception. As long as witches are humans, isn't this statement a matter of course? If an outstanding person cannot lead the race, then the race is destined to have no future. Similarly, if the leader no longer seeks for the benefit of the entire race, then it will be impossible to maintain the race. Random awakenings and the inability to inherit magic power could be considered a special talent in a certain sense, but it would not separate the talented person from the rest of the race. What was truly worth being wary of were artificial choices and specific inheritances. If that happened, then the conflict between the two would be difficult to resolve through time. Eleanor looked at him for a long while, probably trying to read his true thoughts from his expression, but after a moment, she gave up on the idea. I will wait and see. What's your next plan? First, we will carry out a large-scale transformation of North Slope Mountain, turning it into a suitable aerial fortress. This was also the reason why Roland did not allow her to immediately raise the floating island. Be it taking the initiative to attack the new deity of gods or rushing to the bottomless land, it required a large amount of resources as a foundation. Once they left Neverwinter, it would be difficult to obtain supplies. Can you estimate the size of the floating island? It shouldn't be a problem. Eleanor blinked and nodded her head. Other than the factor of the mineral veins reserves, the Red Mist Tower will also increase the effective range, so even if you wish to make it as big as the deity of gods, it is impossible. How exactly does the Red Mist Tower grow? Regarding this, I am as curious as you, so I spent some time to inspect the body. Then I realized that it can turn the god's stone pillars into a part of its body. Simply put, the god's stone will not show any signs of life under normal circumstances, but after fusing with its mother, it will begin to reproduce. Of course, this process will change the nature of the god's stone, causing its strength to decrease, and it will no longer possess the ability to restrict magic power. Then, Roland hesitated for a moment. Can you produce red mist as well? Eleanor let out a long sigh. Yes, I can. In fact, not only did I grasp the various characteristics of the Mother of Soul, I even gained a deeper understanding of the various details. For example, the red mist may fly. From another perspective, it is also a type of demon, and the other demons are produced in a similar manner. Do you mean, he said in surprise. That's right, be it the mad demons, fearsome demons, or lords of hell, they are all the same. I found information regarding them in the Mother of Soul's body. But in order to incubate these demons, a crucial part is still missing, and the mother that completes this part is known as the king. Roland was momentarily speechless. Although he knew that demons did not need to mate, he never expected them to use such a method to prolong their existence. In other words, I also have the possibility of becoming the king of demons. Isn't it ironic for the 3 chiefs of witches to one day produce demons? Eleanor glared at him. So remember what you said, don't let me stay here all the time. This depends on the advancement of magic power technology, and not me, Roland thought helplessly. But he thought further. Through the transfer of consciousness, Eleanor obtained all the information regarding the Mother of Soul without any obstruction. This was similar to learning knowledge, and could be viewed as a narrow form of inheritance. And according to this trend, it was inevitable for different races to inherit, assimilate, and evolve. Why did God have to go to such lengths and use the battle of divine will and the legacy shard to force this process to happen? Secondly, it was the consciousness itself. In stark contrast to the low-level technology of this world, the contact and transfer of consciousness was so easy, as though there were no technical barriers. If the gods had such abilities, it was still reasonable, but how could the underground civilization, demons, and humans do the same? One had to know that in his original world, the most basic of perceptual simulation was only a concept that existed only on the big screen. He vaguely felt that the two were related. Chapter 1456. After returning to the castle from the North Slope mine, Roland summoned Supervisor Barov and Minister of Construction Carr into his office. I need the administrative office to quickly prepare a new plan for the supply of metallurgical materials, to divert the supply from the North Slope Mountain to other places, be it Longsong Stronghold or Redwater City. The only thing to be guaranteed is that the quantity cannot be reduced. The North Slope Mountain will soon be unable to be mined. Their expressions immediately changed as they looked at each other. Carr lowered his head while Barov asked with difficulty, "Your Majesty, is the situation in the north that bad?" North? Roland was slightly stunned before he reacted. They probably thought that a new powerful enemy had appeared in the fertile plains, one that even the First Army could not contend against. Thus, to protect the city, they had no choice but to give up the North Slope mine. He shook his head in exasperation and amusement. The army has not degenerated to the point of needing to lie about their victories to maintain the morale of the people. Furthermore, you are in charge of logistics and should be able to see the general situation from the consumption of medical supplies. Why would you ask such a question? Barov hurriedly wiped the sweat off his forehead. I was just preparing for a rainy day for your Majesty. Actually, I found it strange in the beginning and thought that one of the witches had discovered new information about the Sky Sea realm and did not have the time to inform the administrative office. If that's the case, then why did your Majesty give up the North Slope mine? Carr could not help but ask. Because the mine will soon fly. Roland shrugged. The two fell silent once again, but this time, their expressions were somewhat strange, as though they were doubting their own ears. You didn't hear wrong, it will fly and become a floating island. Roland sized up the two with interest and roughly explained the ancient witch Eleanor and the magic power core. Do you still remember the metal chest that the administrative office arranged to transport back? Inside it is the core of the deity of gods. But due to the risks involved in the transplant, no one can predict the outcome until the very last moment, so I did not tell you the details. Now, you should know that the plan was a success, and Neverwinter will soon have a floating territory. Barov's eyes were wide open, and for a moment, he couldn't say anything. Carr, on the other hand, was so excited that his whole body was shaking. He asked in a trembling voice, "Your Majesty, you don't just want a huge stone, do you?" "You're right." Roland didn't beat around the bush. It will be a floating battleship, a fortress that won't fall. It had to satisfy the needs of a large number of soldiers for several months or even an entire year. Not only could it take the initiative to attack the enemy, but it also had a certain level of defense. How long do you think it will take to transform the North Slope Mountain into this state? As someone with a background in science and technology, he could completely understand Carr's excitement. Any aspiring designer would want to put their work in the most incredible place. To be able to build a floating city with their own hands was definitely an opportunity that could only be encountered by chance. According to the general planning, it will take 4 to 5 years, But I don't think His Majesty can wait that long, and the floating city can't be counted as a general project. Carr replied almost immediately. Considering its characteristics, the Ministry of Construction can completely station an engineering team to move along with the mountain. If I understand correctly, His Majesty must want the aerial knight to be stationed on the mountain. As long as there is a supply point, their attack and defense range will be far greater than any artillery. It seemed that after building more than a dozen landing fields, the Minister of Construction had a deeper understanding of the Air Force. Roland smiled and nodded. Go on. The landing field that can meet the needs of the aerial knight is nothing more than a runway, a warehouse, and a storage room for fuel and ammunition. There are mature and feasible plans and blueprints for these things, and they can be completed in a week at most. So, Your Majesty, Carr put his hand on his chest and said, at least a week. After a week, it will be able to meet your basic requirements. The rest of the project is just a further supplement, improvement, and expansion. What about the building materials? Barav asked. Once the North Slope mountain flies, it will be very difficult to transport them up again. I have naturally considered this point as well. When it came to professional issues, Carr could be said to have a card up his sleeve. There is a small lake halfway up the North Slope mountain, formed by the spring water from the peak of the mountain. In the first week, the engineering team can surround it and turn it into a natural reservoir. Not only can it be used for daily use, but it can also be used for construction. Secondly, the limestone used for the cement can be obtained by excavating the mountain. I believe Madame Eleanor will not mind that the floating city is a little lighter. Bricks and wood can be obtained on the spot. As for the steel, it is best to prepare it in advance. If Miss Hummingbird and Miss Molly are willing to help, the amount that can be transported in a week will definitely be considerable. In addition, the third border city of the Tequila Witches can be of great help. Those endless caves only need to be slightly modified to become the best warehouse. With these things, even if there is no supply for a long period of time, the engineering team can still work for a year or two. At this point, he looked at Barav. Of course, if the furnace area and the steelmaking yard are also preserved, this period will undoubtedly be even longer. Roland could not help but clap his hands. This plan was indeed the most suitable method in the limited time available. First, they could ensure that the floating island had basic combat capabilities in the shortest time possible. As for other things, such as the living conditions of the workers and the replenishment of the functional buildings, they could all be improved at a later time. Barav, what do you think? In that case, apart from the First Army, there will also be many citizens living on the island. The old director stroked his beard. It seems that I have to think of a recruitment plan that is sufficiently attractive. Roland smiled in satisfaction. It seemed that the other party had clearly grasped the key point of the plan. Boarding the floating island meant that they would be away from their homeland and the land for a long time. The difficult living conditions in the early stage would not be comparable to the residential area of Neverwinter. Therefore, regardless of whether it was publicity or remuneration, the administrative office had to prepare well. Only a group of willing workers could efficiently complete the task. In the past, this kind of work had been led by Roland. Now that Barav was willing to take on this responsibility, it was obvious that he had fully understood Roland's ruling philosophy. Then let's implement this idea. Roland finally made the decision. Sir, welcome back. When Victor walked into the office of the Miracle Building, Tinkle greeted him cheerfully, just like when he was in the hotel. The business of the Rainbow Stone was growing steadily, and other similar competitors had also appeared. In order to stabilize the supply, he had to frequently travel between the Kingdom of Everwinter and the port of Clearwater. Although it was rather tiring, he enjoyed it. Compared with the uncertain jewelry sales in the past, he was getting closer and closer to his original goal, to become a big businessman who could support his family. As soon as Victor reached out his hand, Tinkle had already placed the Grey Castle Weekly in his hand. This tacit understanding made him smile. Although the Port of Clearwater also had a weekly newspaper, the time was always 2 to 3 weeks later. For a city like Neverwinter, 2 to 3 weeks of change was enough to be astonishing. As expected, The title of the latest issue of the newspaper on the first page instantly attracted his attention. Above the clouds, the Vault of Heaven project is officially announced. Chapter 1457. The key to ending the Battle of Divine Will has been found. Victor reads softly. His Majesty has decided to take the initiative to attack the enemy and end the war outside the fertile plains? Even after experiencing so many unimaginable things, this report was still full of shock. Almost every line of it was worth writing about. In the past, this kind of news would never have been known by anyone other than the royal family, let alone a commoner merchant without a title like him. The report outlined a magnificent scene. The previously sensational floating island falling into the sea did not signify the end of the demons' attack. Thousands of miles away, a new blackstone fortress was rushing towards Neverwinter day and night. And below it, millions of demons surged, a number that was enough to drown the entire human kingdom. In order to prevent this from happening, His Majesty decided to take the initiative to prevent the flames of war from spreading to the commoners. After defeating the invading enemy, the expeditionary army would head to the other side of the world, the border between the two continents, to remove the threat of the Battle of Divine Will. Once successful, long-term peace would arrive. Be it the demons or demonic beasts, they would no longer be a threat to the safety of humans. Victor was no stranger to expeditions. After all, more than a year ago, he had personally witnessed the birth of a miracle. Relying on the heavy machinery known as trains, a large number of the First Army traveled more than 500 kilometers across the uninhabited fertile plains and defeated the demons entrenched in the ruins of the north. At that time, Grey Castle Weekly had recorded the entire process of the battle in detail. Through the so-called photographs, he could still recall the feeling of looking down at the black trains galloping across the plains from an aerial perspective. But this time, His Majesty seemed to have done it even more thoroughly. He actually planned to raise a mountain into the sky and use it as a stronghold for this expedition. Is this really something that humans can do? Victor could not wait to flip to the second page and saw that the plan was divided into 3 parts. The first was the liftoff phase. The North Slope Mountain, along with nearly a kilometer of land below it, would break away from the shackles of the impassable mountain range and become an independent entity. The second was the trial phase. The North Slope Mountain would be incorporated into the army and officially given the name Eleanor Skycruiser. In this period of time, it would patrol the surroundings of Neverwinter. Apart from the necessary combat training, it would also be waiting for the right time to attack. The final stage was to officially set out and keep the enemy at a distance of 1,000 miles. The administrative office called it a war that would decide the fate of mankind. Apart from the military, the support of the workers in various industries was also crucial. Therefore, the remuneration was quite generous, basically 2 to 3 times the average of the same industry. Not only that, but the names of all participants would be engraved into a monument that would stand forever in Royal City. In addition, Barav, the Hand of the King, also revealed at the end that those who landed on the island might have the opportunity to see the most powerful weapon in human history. Seeing this, Victor knew that the administrative office would be completely blocked. The biggest difference between the residents of Neverwinter and the migrants from other cities was that they regarded this land as their own. When he interacted with the locals, he often had the illusion that this place not only belonged to His Majesty, but also to them. Moreover, once he settled down and obtained an identity card, similar feelings of approval would quickly spread, because he himself had experienced it deeply. Even though he was from the Kingdom of Dawn, he felt proud when he heard outsiders talking about the miracles of Neverwinter, which was something he had never experienced before. If not for his family business, Victor also had the urge to fly to the sky and see for himself. Help me contact the administrative office. Tell them that Rainbow Stone is willing to donate 1,000 sets of clothes. Got it. Tinkle nodded. By the way, have you found out the exact date of the launch of the North Slope Mountain? It should be within 2 or 3 days. The top of the mountain has become completely different from before. 2 or 3 days. I'm afraid that the good viewing seats have already been taken. Victor closed the newspaper and walked to the French window. Although the miracle building was tall, it was too far from the impassable mountain range. It was more appropriate to witness such a marvelous scene nearby. He turned around and handed a key to Tinkle. Tinkle, you should know what to do, right? Fortunately, as long as the problem could be solved with money, it was not a big deal to him. Leave it to me, my lord. Tinkle took the key with a smile. 3 days later, the First Army pulled up a long cordon at the foot of the mountain. This made everyone in Neverwinter realize that the long-awaited moment was about to come. At this time, the North Slope mountain had completely changed. Looking from a distance, it was surrounded by dense scaffolding. The original irregular mountain wall seemed to have been artificially repaired. Not only did it become smoother, but many places were also patched. The large and small metal plates or oil film cloth did not match the mountain itself, but made this natural object more like a weapon. What shocked Victor the most were the hundreds of long flags hanging from the top. They were like the skirt of the mountain, undulating in the wind like waves. The tower and the spear symbolized the kingdom of Grey Castle. The combination of red, black, and white made it look incomparably solemn. This kind of visual impact would definitely be unforgettable. More and more people gathered on the street. By noon, several main roads were completely packed. If not for the black-clothed policemen and the army directing the crowd to the side of the misty forest, perhaps half of the city would have been paralyzed. As the deep siren resounded over the city, Victor, who was at the best position on the roof of the West Street, felt a slight tremor under his feet. Soon, this tremor turned into a loud rumble. In an instant, the whole of Neverwinter seemed to be boiling. It was the sound of the mountains being torn apart. Although he had expected it, when he really saw this scene, his mouth was still opened to the maximum. Tinkle even tightened her grip on his arm. He saw that the North Slope mountain was slowly but unstoppably rising, and the parts of the mountain range connected to it burst out clouds of dust. The scaffolding standing on the ground collapsed layer by layer, as if it was no longer able to restrain this huge creature. After throwing the collapsed trees, gravel, and iron scaffolding under its body, the larger bottom supported the falling dandruff. The whole scene was like pulling out a radish and bringing out the mud, but this time the mud was a land 1 kilometer wide. It was clearly an inverted triangle, and the lowest point was at the center of the floating island. As the North Slope mountain rose, a huge pit was left on the ground. In the face of the sudden disappearance of the roof, countless active underground animals fled in panic, becoming a vivid footnote to this historical scene. This should have been something that was absolutely impossible for human beings to do. But the fluttering flag on the mountain clearly announced that it belonged to the kingdom of Grey Castle, belonged to the human race. After the shock, the crowd burst into deafening cheers. When the first "Long Live" was heard, it was destined to be difficult to calm down in a short period of time. The fanatical atmosphere gradually subsided after a long time. Victor licked his slightly dry lips and was about to bring Tinkle back to the inn when he suddenly saw the figure of an old man on the opposite roof from the corner of his eyes. The figure was so familiar that even his footsteps slowed down. When Victor wanted to take a closer look, he found that the old man had disappeared. "Sir, what's wrong?" Tinkle seemed to have noticed his abnormality. "No, nothing. I probably saw wrong," Victor said hesitantly. Because no matter how he looked at it, that old man somewhat resembled his father. But how could his father appear in a place like this? He shook his head and quickly put the thought to the back of his mind. Chapter 1458. In the reception hall of Grey Castle, Roland quietly looked at the old man in front of him. He was sitting in a wheelchair. His hair was gray, his cheeks were sunken, and the wrinkles on his forehead were prominent. Obviously, he was nearing the end of his life. However, compared to his age, his eyes were not too cloudy and still looked full of vitality. The monocle on the tip of his nose and the black bow tie around his neck further enhanced this feeling. While Roland was looking at him, he was also looking at Roland. After a while, Roland broke the silence and said with a smile, "It's not easy to invite you here from the Kingdom of Dawn. Welcome to the new king's city of Grey Castle, Mr. Banach Lothar. Thank you for your hard work. It's my honor to be summoned by the king of Grey Castle. Banach Lothar slightly lowered his head. May I know what your majesty wants me to do? You've already contributed a lot to Grey Castle. There's nothing more you need to do. Banach Lothar was obviously surprised. Your majesty, did you make a mistake? Generally, people at this age would have a slower thinking speed, and they would speak incoherently and stutteringly. However, Banach Lothar not only answered immediately but also controlled his facial muscles to make a fake expression, which was enough to prove that his brain had never stopped thinking. Compared with the irreversible aging of his body, his consciousness might be a more realistic reflection of his own condition. I know you have concerns, but please rest assured that I have no malicious intentions towards black money. Roland spread out his hands and said, the oracles, who passed the message to you are also a member of Neverwinter. In fact, it was me who asked them to send the message. Roland had used Pasha's mouth to summon Banach Lothar to Grey Castle with the reason that the time for the transformation ceremony had come. After confirming the target, he had sent someone to take him back to the castle. Although this method was a little crude, it was more straightforward. Your Majesty, I don't quite understand what you mean. It doesn't matter. I'll tell you until you understand. This is a very complicated story, but it really happened. Roland gave a brief account of the ancient witch's past, as well as the nature of the god's punishment army's transformation ceremony. The soul vessel could only collect the consciousness of those who possessed the demon. In other words, those without the demon could only become a shell. In a sense, turning into a body without a sense of self was in line with the ancient witch's explanation of prolonging their lives. If black money was just an ordinary underground chamber of commerce, he would not have cared too much. However, in the battle against the demon's Western Front army, black money had made a great contribution. Not only had it helped the First Army maintain the intelligence network in the Kingdom of Wolfheart and the Kingdom of Everwinter, but it had also provided crucial information to fill in the gaps of the witch's investigation in the Red Mist area. Perhaps Banach did not do this for the fate of mankind or to save his compatriots, but his contribution was real. Roland did not think that turning such a meritorious person into a mindless puppet was a suitable reward, so he decided to meet him in person. After a long time, Banach Lothar slowly took off his presbyopic glasses and said in a slightly trembling voice, You mean immortality is just a scam? Roland sighed softly. At present, the only people who can maintain their consciousness and not age are those who possess the demon. For humans, they are witches. Even though he had opened up the dream world, he could not be sensed by the soul vessel. But after drinking those potions, my body is indeed getting better. Those potions are not completely useless. They increase the success rate of the ceremony by overdrawing one's vitality, but they can't be used endlessly. Roland shook his head and interrupted him. Soon, the side effects will appear. This is also the reason why I asked you to come here in a hurry. Banach was stunned for a moment. You mean I don't have much time left? I'm sorry, Roland said regretfully. I can't fulfill my promise perfectly, so I can only make it up to you in other ways. Black money has protected the witches and made great contributions to the battle of divine will. If you have anything you want, you can tell me. This is the reward you deserve. Nightingale once asked him why he did not let Pasha and the other witches solve the problem by themselves. If he came forward as the king, the consequences of this scam would also be transferred to Grey Castle. She was not wrong. But Roland knew that since Grey Castle had accepted the Tequila Witches, he should not only enjoy the benefits they brought, but also take the blame for them. It was also an obligation to accept them. Banach was silent for a long time. Even if it's a matter in the Kingdom of Dawn, can you handle it? You should know my influence in the Kingdom of Dawn. Then I can rest assured. Unexpectedly, Banach did not despair or become hysterical, but showed a calm smile. I want to live longer because I want to protect the black money industry for my children. If I die, the other nobles and merchants will never let go of the opportunity to divide it up. In the face of big enough profits, A few lives are insignificant. If your majesty is willing to intervene, I think no one will dare to act rashly. This is even more reliable than my personal longevity. In that case, what else do I have to complain about? Roland pondered for a moment. Are you sure this is the reward you want? Your majesty can't. I do. It's not impossible. He paused. I wonder if you've heard of the Rainbow Stone? I've heard of it. Banach thought for a moment. It seems to be a new clothing store in your country. It's very large, and some finished products are even sold to the Kingdom of Dawn. But with all due respect, in terms of style and design, it is far inferior to ours. Because the craftsmen Victor hired are all from the Lothar family, and he didn't tell you that this kind of clothing is only 1/10 of the price of other hand-woven clothes in Neverwinter. Roland coughed twice. As far as I know, the founder of this clothing store is called Victor Lothar, your fourth son. In addition, the income of the clothing store has been converted to more than 10,000 golden dragon pieces. With this talent, I think even without Greycastle's backing, he won't easily lose to those merchant families. 10,000 golden dragon pieces was by no means a small amount. In the past, only chaos drinks could exceed this amount in Neverwinter. The reason was simple. Not everyone needed drinks, but everyone had to wear clothes. As the population of Neverwinter became highly concentrated, the scale of basic needs would only further increase. In the face of the foreseeable profits of large-scale industrial production, the turnover of the underground Chamber of Commerce was not worth mentioning. This time, Banach was really surprised. Your Majesty, what you said, is true. Ever since he left the City of Glow, he rarely contacted me. I thought he was still in the jewelry business. Victor is now in Neverwinter. It's not difficult for you to meet him. Why don't you go and verify it yourself? But you have to hurry. Yes. I know. Banach could not help but grab the wheel tightly. This action obviously revealed his inner thoughts. Please allow me to leave, Your Majesty. Roland nodded. When he was about to ask his guards to send him out, he suddenly said, You said I don't have much time left. Can you let me spend the last moment on the floating island? Roland closed his eyes. If that's what you want. After the door was closed, Nightingale appeared and muttered in a low voice, Strange. What's wrong? His reaction at the beginning was a little strange. I can't say it was a lie, but the magic power gave me a very vague feeling, not as calm as he appeared. Nightingale shrugged. I see, Roland said thoughtfully. Do you know the reason? Probably. He lowered his voice and tilted his head to look out the window. Longevity is always full of temptations. If one's expectations are disappointed, no one will easily accept it. But it's not a lie, Nightingale said with emphasis. Because he knows that no matter what he does, he can't change the result. Roland sighed with emotion. Since he can't change it, he has to accept it. Instead of becoming enemies with the King of Greycastle with resentment, it's better to pretend to be open-minded to win the king's favor. Any unnecessary emotions will become a sunk cost. I'm afraid this is what he thinks. There are a lot of people who understand this, but only a few can actually do it. This is what makes him amazing. He finally understood why these big businessmen were treated as nobles in the Kingdom of Dawn. Their ability to control themselves and reduce losses were better than most nobles even in politics. But you. Speaking of this, Roland could not help but look at Nightingale. Now, not only can you distinguish between truth and falsehood, but you can also feel the inner emotions. Are you about to evolve? Do you think I'll deliberately not tell you after I evolve? Or, in other words, I'll still be so modest? Nightingale glared at him impatiently. That makes sense. Roland sensibly kept his mouth shut. Chapter 1459. Ding-ling-ling-ling. The phone on the desk suddenly rang. It took Roland a few seconds to find the one that was waiting to be connected. He leaned over and picked up the receiver. The label on the phone indicated that the caller was from Knight Academy. With the increasing number of lines connecting to the office, he had no choice but to add a small table in front of the office to specially place the phones. Is that so? I'll be right there. After hanging up the phone, Roland stood up with a joyful expression, picked up the coat hanging behind the chair, and put it on. Tilly? Nightingale raised her brows and asked. Yes, the preparations for the large plane have been completed. It will be flying soon. The large plane he was referring to was the key project of Greycastle's design bureau, the 4-engine long-range bomber. After knowing that there was a possibility of obtaining a mobile landing strip, he immediately inquired the relevant technicians about the feasibility of changing the engine. The answer he received was that as long as the weight was adjusted slightly, there would not be any influence on the aerodynamics. But changing the engine of the Phoenix would result in a drastic decrease in performance, such as the longer runway required for takeoff, the capacity to carry half of the internal fuel, and the reduced flight range to a third of the original. In short, the new plane was unable to meet the requirements for long-distance raids. And its only advantage was that it could immediately see the results. The Phoenix's engine was essentially an improved star-shaped engine, which Anna had completely grasped in the past year. Compared to the large inline engine used for the bomber, it was much more mature. Even with the design bureau providing all the blueprints, the prototype had to undergo platform testing, which would definitely slow down the progress of the entire project. In fact, the bomber was included in the one-year plan when the plan was formulated. To Neverwinter, it was an extremely daring plan. Even if there were no accidents during the research and development process, it was still half a year before it could be produced. If not for Senior Lord Mask making Roland realize that the deity of gods had the ability to perish together with itself, a year would not be considered long. But now, the situation was completely different. Once the deity of gods overdrafted its god's stone mine and rose into the sky, even if its core was destroyed, it would not be able to save the massive destruction it would cause. Coupled with the fact that humans now had the floating islands, the loss of the bomber's performance was no longer an unacceptable thing. Stepping over the tangled cables, Roland put on his coat and walked to the door. Let's go take a look. This is the largest plane in history. Clang! Just as he was about to cross the mahogany table, the corner of his shirt suddenly touched the teapot on the side of the table. By the time Roland realized it, the teapot was already tilting towards the ground. Nightingale seemed to move. Her figure disappeared for a moment, but in the end, she was still too late. The teapot seemed to have been hit by something invisible. It spun half a circle in the air before falling on the ground and breaking into several pieces. The hot tea that had just been brewed spilled all over the ground. Your reaction seems to have slowed down. Roland teased. You've never failed to catch something with your bare hands before. Could it be that you've eaten too many snacks and become heavier? Nightingale surprisingly did not retort. Instead, she looked at her hands in confusion. Let the maidservants clean up. Let's head to the Air Knight Academy first. Tilly is still waiting there. At the Air Knight Academy's landing area, a black plane that was much larger than the Seagull was slowly being towed onto the runway. In addition to its large size, the pair of wide wings and the 4 engines hanging under the wings were the most obvious differences from other fighter jets. Even though the short and thick star-shaped engines did not match the plane's slender body, most of the onlookers did not notice the incongruity. Just the fact that it was unprecedentedly large was enough to capture everyone's attention. Compared to the Fire of Heaven's light appearance, its entirely black paint made it look like a gigantic beast lying on the ground. Good was no exception. Ever since the plane appeared, his eyes had never left the target. If he had not personally piloted the Fire of Heaven, he would have found it hard to believe that such a heavy machine could really fly. But even so, Good was filled with astonishment and shock. It had only been a year since he left Neverwinter, and this place had already created such an exaggerated thing. Her Highness the Queen's ability was a little too exaggerated. Other than constantly repeating, "so big," Finkin could not find any other words to describe it. I reckon that only the most outstanding aerial knight will be qualified to pilot this gigantic object in the future, Hines said with a sigh. In our class, Good is probably the only one who has a chance. That's not the case. Unexpectedly, the one who answered him was the usually indifferent instructor Eagle. As far as I know, the pilot of the bomber will not be selected from the first-line flight officers. Of course, this does not mean that those people are not outstanding. It's just that according to Princess Tilly's judgment, the most important goal of the Air Knight is to ensure air superiority. Protect the bomber and shoot down any enemy that dares to approach. If they can do this, it won't be a problem even if the large plane is filled with rookies. Sir Instructor. The three of them immediately straightened their backs. Relax, I'm not here to reprimand you. Eagle glanced at them expressionlessly. You're already the top warriors of the Air Knight. Have more confidence in yourselves. Yes, yes. The three of them saluted. Next, everyone will be facing the main force of the demons. Work hard. Eagle Face clasped his hands behind his back and walked to the other side. Finkin heaved a sigh of relief. Why do I feel that Sir Instructor is a little gentle? Hines interrupted. Indeed. Good shrugged. But if he hears the gossip behind his back, he won't hesitate to make you clean the toilet for another week. The two of them immediately changed the topic. At this moment, the propellers of the black plane spun at high speed, and the surging roar instantly drowned out the voices of the onlookers. Even after such a long time, when Good heard this familiar and rich rhythm, he still felt his blood surge. Sure enough, I love flying. Amidst the continuous sounds of the pistons, the bomber began to slowly move forward and continuously accelerate. This process took far longer than the fire of heaven, but when it neared the end of the runway, it still raised its nose bit by bit. Gravity could no longer restrain it. The giant black beast seemed to have spread its long wings and climbed into the sky against the slightly damp sea breeze. After a round of climbing, the bomber changed its direction and flew northwest of Neverwinter. And in that direction, the North Slope mountain floating in midair was especially eye-catching. Good knew that all the elements for them to take the initiative to attack were in place. The decisive battle with the demons was imminent. Chapter 1460. After taking care of official business that night, Roland returned to his bedroom and saw Anna arranging her clothes. Beside her was a huge suitcase. What are you doing? You'll know once you see it. She patted the folded clothes in the closet. Preparing for a long journey. Then Neverwinter will have to shut down, Roland said half-jokingly. Is it really all right for the Minister of Industry to leave without saying goodbye? Don't worry. Other than a few finished products like steam turbines and reinforced piston engines, the factory can basically produce them. At most, the passing rate will be lower. Also, the members of the Society of Wondrous Crafts that you brought back are quite talented. It won't be a problem to let them manage the department. Wait. Roland suddenly sensed that something was amiss. The clothes Anna had picked out were all simple and durable. There wasn't a single silk dress or skirt that she usually wore at banquets or other formal occasions. It did not look like she was joking. Where are you going? The floating island with you. She revealed a look as though he needed to ask. You aren't planning on waiting in Neverwinter for the results of the front lines, right? I can tell that you have already made up your mind after your conversation with the 3 chiefs of Tequila. Besides, heading to the bottomless land from the sky is far more convenient than walking along the ridge of the continent. Even if you don't return, you have a good reason to do so. That won't do, Roland subconsciously rejected. Let's not talk about the final battle with the demons. No one knows what's in the bottomless land. Besides, I heard from Haxord that it has been occupied by the Sky-Sea realm. It's not like you don't know how risky this trip is. Anna reached out her hands and gently patted his face, forcefully straightening his shaking head. Then she rubbed his cheeks. Of course I know. It's because I know, that's why I'm doing this. Her voice wasn't loud, and there was even a sense of gentleness to it. But just by looking into her eyes, it was obvious that this matter was not to be rejected. For an instant, her appearance overlapped with the first time they met. At that time, Anna was still a little childish. Apart from her abilities, she had nothing else. But even so, It was extremely difficult to change her mind once she had made up her mind. Roland had to make one last attempt. You're different now. As a queen, it's not mature for you to abandon everything in Neverwinter and take this unnecessary risk. If they were truly mature, they would never agree to let you enter the bottomless land without knowing anything. Anna pressed her hands down and interrupted him. What will you become in the end, whether you fail or disappear, are all possible endings. In other words, this attack might very well be the last time we meet. Do you think I will still stay in the city? Since it's going to be an adventure, it doesn't matter if I'm included. Roland knew that his final attempt had failed. After all, if it were him, he wouldn't be willing to wait alone at a time like this. If we don't make it back, then the situation can't get any worse, right? Anna let go of her hand and smiled. But even so, I won't regret it. Passing through the distorted black and white lines, Nightingale walked into the empty office. It was already late at night, and most people were asleep. Only the flickering flames could be seen in the courtyard. After drawing the curtains, she opened the drawer and placed the stone of lighting on the lamp holder. Soon, the room was illuminated by a gentle light. The fragments of the teapot had long been removed by the maidservants, and the carpet had been completely changed. There were no traces of the previous accident, as though it had never happened. Nightingale walked past the telephone table and quickly found her target, a wooden box placed on the table, covered in messy documents. In the fog, she did not need light to distinguish objects. The ever-changing domain was like another world, eternally maintaining its tricolored state. Even without light, the black, white, and gray outlines could be seen clearly. There was only one exception. She opened the box, and inside was a stack of papers filled with words, as well as a few translucent stones. Nightingale held one of the stones in her palm and attempted to enter the fog. The surging magic power suddenly dissipated before it could form, as though it was obstructed by something. As expected, she sighed and sullenly threw the stone back into the wooden box. It was a report from the Magic Tower, written by either Agatha or Celine or Isabella. Of course, it was more likely that they wrote it together. The crisis of the deity of gods had just been averted, and the red mist on the Hermes Plateau had yet to completely dissipate. The tequila witches also needed to digest the findings and experiments of the pure witches, so Isabella decided to temporarily stay in Neverwinter. Coupled with the technology obtained from the demons, they seemed to have produced a lot of results during this period of time, and a report would be sent to the office every few days. Usually, Roland would finish reading it on the same day, but today was an exception. The separation of the North Slope Mountain and the test flight of the large plane were arranged on the same day, so he did not have the time to open the box. Nightingale had noticed its existence from the start. After all, in the world of fog, there were only two things that would not be affected. One was the colorful magic power, and the other was the pure black hole created by the God's Stone. Of course, according to Isabella's research, the two could be classified as the same thing. As such, she had discovered the black light when Roland met with Banach Lothar. But compared to an ordinary God's Stone, its range of influence was much smaller, and it was obvious that it had been modified by Isabella. As it was a sample related to the report, she did not pay much attention to it. This was the reason why she did not use transient steps when the teapot fell. The black light blocked the falling teapot, and the moment she entered the fog, her body had already made the judgment that it was irreversible. If that was all, it was just a small accident. However, Nightingale saw a line that formed the table bounced forward under her touch, passed through the black light, and finally hit the teapot, changing its falling trajectory. Any distortion in the fog was uncontrollable, and even she had to be wary of those restless lines at all times, or she would be the one who would be cut. This was the first time she had seen such a thing. But Nightingale wasn't sure if it was just a coincidence, or if something had really happened to her. She used her ability again, repeatedly touching the corner of the table in the fog, and simulated the situation at that time to rush forward a few times, but nothing happened. It seemed that she was thinking too much. Nightingale withdrew her hand awkwardly. Agatha was right. She could not think that evolution was easy just because many witches in the Union had done it. Fortunately, she did not say it at that time, or she would definitely be laughed at by Roland. She put the stone of lighting back into the drawer and left the office the way she came. Crack. Suddenly, there was a soft sound in the quiet room. Chapter 1461. A few days later, south of the fertile plains, Tower Station 10. Balshan lay prone outside the gun turret, gazing at the silhouette of the ancient city in the distance. She had read about the northern expedition in the weekly newspaper and knew that it was the historical witch city of Tequila. In order to capture it, the demons did not hesitate to travel thousands of miles, but were ultimately repelled by the First Army. And now, they were about to defeat a new enemy here and recapture Tequila. 1 minute, 30 seconds, 10 seconds, she silently counted as she plugged her ears. Boom, 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 boom. The roar of cannons resounded behind her. The continuous tremors transmitted through the ground to the vehicle, and she could feel her arms go slightly numb. That was the artillery unit's 152mm long-song cannon pouring fire at the target. Compared to the short-barreled field cannon on the tank, the sound was on a completely different level. Team leader, are you still not used to the sound of cannons? The driver, Bay, turned around and teased. He sat cross-legged at the front of the vehicle, holding a can of instant food in his hands. This was one of the things she admired about him. Even in a battlefield littered with corpses and filled with the rotting stench of demonic beasts, he could still eat as usual. That won't do. You have to learn to let your ears filter out those irrelevant noises so that you can maintain your focus. I think your ears aren't very sensitive. Balshan expressionlessly looked away. Although the driver and the gunner were experienced veterans, according to the rules, the commander was the leader of the team. Furthermore, in terms of actual age, she might even be slightly older than the two of them. The only sound I need to listen to is the abnormal sound of the screaming stone. It's not the sound of cannons, nor is it your nonsense. Do you understand? Team leader, you're really harsh with your words. Bay smacked his lips. I thought that Miss Witches were all sweet and adorable, just like Angel Nana. 5 years ago, witches were the devil's minions, the embodiment of evil. No one will like you if you act like this. Who said that? I think team leader is pretty good. The gunner, sure, interrupted. He's straightforward and capable. He's never joined the army, but he's able to adapt to the battlefield in a short period of time. He's definitely the best choice for a commander. The two of them looked at Shore. The latter was stunned. What? Did I say something wrong? No. Balshan shrugged. Although you missed 9 out of 10 shots during training, you're not completely useless. Gunner seemed to be enjoying it. All right, let's not talk about this anymore. Bay quickly changed the topic. By the way, team leader, who was the person waiting for you outside the campsite at Tower Station number 9? He also seems to be wearing the uniform of the First Army. Is he your friend? Why do you ask? I saw the medal hanging on his chest, so I wanted to get to know him. Those who can receive the medal are not simple. He should be a very powerful guy. I do know him, but he isn't that impressive. Without me, he would probably have become food for the demonic beasts. Balshan pretended to be indifferent, but her tone couldn't help but soften. Wow, you're too strict. Before he could finish, she covered her ears. Another round of deafening bombardment. Bay, who was completely unprepared, grimaced at the rumbling noises. And this time, after the bombardment, 3 green signal flares flew up. That was the signal to attack. It seems like you aren't very focused either. Balshan patted the steel plate on the side of the turret. Convoy 12 set off immediately. Bay didn't retort. Instead, he threw down the can in his hand and slipped into the car through the driver's window. Shore also retreated into the narrow turret and got ready for battle. Regardless of how they usually were, the two of them were not careless at the critical moment. Balshan raised the telescope and saw that under the bombardment of the artillery, many demonic beasts had already escaped from the ruins and were fleeing towards the north. Turning back to look, The First Army soldiers had split into dozens of small teams and were steadily advancing along the tracks of the tanks. This formation was obviously not meant to deal with ordinary demonic hybrids. The deeper they went into the plains, the more blade beasts they encountered. It went from one every 2 to 3 days to a few a day now. As they were hard to detect with the naked eye, they were far more difficult to deal with than ordinary demonic beasts. Without a doubt, the strategy of the upper echelons of the military was effective. Shriek, resonance, allowed them to discover targets outside the firing range of the short-barreled cannons and annihilate them. However, the enemy didn't seem to be purely wild beasts. They would hide behind all sorts of concealment and launch sudden attacks on the troops. The bombardment of artillery could scare off the demonic beasts, but it couldn't scare them away. Hence, it took a lot of effort to recapture the fortresses along the railway. After paying a certain price, the First Army quickly established a battle strategy with the armored troops as the core. Originally, the flintlock troops only treated the tanks as scouts, but now, they had learned to rely on them to clear the fortifications. And the Tequila ruins before them was the most complicated battlefield that wasn't in the wild. Half an hour later, the vanguard, Convoy 12, drove into Tequila City. Beside Balshan were Convoy 9 and 17. According to the plan, they were in charge of clearing the area from the main street to the West Borough Square and recapturing the 2 fortresses that were set up there. Looking at the surroundings, Balshan couldn't help but feel her scalp go numb. The numerous stone buildings made the situation in the city extremely complicated, and it greatly reduced the detection range of the sigil of screaming. She was currently monitoring multiple magic power sources, but was still unable to lock onto a specific target. How did you manage to conquer this place previously? It's simple. As long as we get rid of the red mist towers and those skeletons, the demons will naturally retreat, Shur replied. Have you found the enemy? Not yet, but it's certain that there are plenty of monsters hiding in this city. Balshan gestured to the soldiers behind her, getting them to move closer to the tanks and at the same time widen the distance between them and the other 2 convoys. Not long after, a gray concrete fortress appeared at the end of the street. Although the First Army was forced to abandon this place, these sturdy fortifications weren't destroyed by the enemy. And at this moment, a shrill cry clearly became louder. Balshan frowned. That wasn't a sound that a blade beast should have. She looked at the captain of Convoy 9, Amy, who shook her head, indicating that she was equally puzzled. And when the convoy passed the fortress, the sigil's hum was so loud that even Shell could hear it. Out of caution, she got the 2 convoys to stop temporarily and decided to take a look at the plaza. She also activated the sigil of resonance by her hand. Even if the target wasn't the blade beasts, she wanted to see where the magic power source was pointing to. Soon, a fluorescent light appeared out of thin air, pointing straight at the center of the plaza not far away, but there was nothing there. Could it be that she had encountered a new invisible enemy? That's not right. Balshan quickly realized that the surface of the plaza seemed to have been pried open by something, and there were black traces of corrosion around it. That thing was hidden beneath the ground. Just as she had this thought, the mud beneath the bricks suddenly arched up. A monster made of flesh and ribs crawled out from the ground, and at the same time, it spat out a pile of transparent bodies. If not for the slime on those bodies, Balshan wouldn't have been able to separate them from the background. Almost at the same time, the sigil of screaming emitted a high-pitched warning. She suddenly realized that those things were all blade beasts. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.